I'm Amanda Fancy. I'm the dealer-owner of Gow's Home Hardware and Furniture. We've been at this location for about a year. We started in 1848, way back when. This is our 5th location, so we've never have left the town limits. So when we're looking to build this location, we had lots of opportunity to potentially look at outside of the town limits, but it was really key for us to be and continue to be a growing business in Bridgewater. Bridgewater, Nova Scotia is unique. We have a beautiful countryside. Our town is 7,500 people, but then, our customer reach is about 45,000. So, we're talking about lots of small communities, hidden treasures. There's huge opportunity here, and I think that it's certainly worthwhile to make the visit, make the call, do some inquiring, because it certainly is somewhere where I think there would be some strong investment opportunities for sure.
My name is Joey Richard. I come from Quebec, Montreal. I've studied opera at the Montreal Conservatoire of Music, so this is where I've learned about Italian. the language and the food. And my passion just became bigger and bigger for food. I've been cooking for 20 years, almost. I opened a family business, but the only thing I forgot is that my family is still in Montreal. So I'm like, I'm trying, I make new friends. I'm building this thing, but it is a family business here. My chef is like my brother. His wife is like my sister. So, I recreated a family environment. We do the real recipes, starting from the real ingredients. And for Italian food, what the secret is, few ingredients and very fresh. So each recipe would be like 3-4 ingredients maximum. But it's just the best ingredients and makes it so delicious. If you think that it's impossible to have your own business, I'm the living proof that it is possible. People want us to thrive. We work together. So everybody helps each other. If you want to be part of a community, it is the community to be part of.
My name is Joel Holland. I'm the owner and operator of 902 Athletics. I found the opportunity, started this gym in my parents' garage, and now we are currently in an 8,600 square foot facility. A lot of people come here because of the community. The things that we offer here are different than a normal gym. It's an open atmosphere where you come in, the music's played over the loudspeakers, not in your ears. You don't put earbuds in and just walk around from one machine to the other. You focus on yourself, but at the same time you get to meet new people. We have 3 floors, which we do CrossFit, boot camps, athletic training, and personal training. We have so many other businesses that are growing our economy and feeding into it becoming more populated, a place where people actually stay as opposed to leave. We're growing, we're getting bigger, and a lot of people are on the same push to become a better Bridgewater. I love this place. It's my home, and there is no other place that I would want my business to be.
All right, good evening, everyone, and welcome you all to this regularly scheduled meeting of Bridgewater Town Council. And as always, the town of Bridgewater is located in Mi'kma'ki, the unceded ancestral territory of the Mi'kmaq people, and it is our privilege to be here. Are there any additions or deletions to the agenda? Hearing none, can I have a motion to approve the agenda? Thank you, Councillor Tanner, seconded by Deputy Mayor Vergier. All those in favor? Motion is carried. Thank you. Down to announcements. Unfortunately, starting with a sad announcement, as many of you know, former Mayor Ernie Bolivar passed away late last week. Mayor Bolivar was the longest serving mayor of the town of Bridgewater, and someone that the community will remember very, very fondly. I know he often would give his feedback, and anytime, my memory is anytime the topic of the Fraser was mentioned or the Old Wharf, there would be a phone call. And Ernie was someone who always wanted to make sure that the proper information was relayed to the public, especially about that property. And his knowledge that he retained for all the years. I know I heard from him a lot in my roles, Mayor. I know in speaking to Mayor Walker, and I'm sure Mayor Publicover also would say that that Mayor Bolivar would call and impart his wisdom onto them as well. So he will be missed by many. The funeral service is this Saturday morning at 11 o'clock at Bridgewater United Church. And on behalf of the entire community, our thoughts are with Marilyn and the family of Ernie. So he will be missed. It was a little bit bittersweet in a way that the news of Ernie's passing was the same day that the town was being recognized in the legislature for our 125th birthday. And I had the privilege of being there with Mayor Walker, and Mayor Cook was there as well. And so, Mayor Bolivar wasn't with us in person, but he certainly was there in spirit, and to have his name even noted amongst us at that time, I think was very important and very special. So, and it was amazing to see Harry Cook, who I'm reminded of every 2 weeks as his name is on the gavel that I use with meetings. So, other announcements from Council? Maybe we'll touch on today. We had today at lunch the Premier Houston was Best Western for the State of the Province address. It was sold out and then some. So great crowd, and hats off to the Bridgewater Best Western for staying open a week beyond their scheduled date. They're under renovation and expanding, which is exciting. But they agreed to stay open so that they could host this event, and it's great to see lots of members of cabinet there, and so we were able to, share some thoughts and some challenges and opportunities with our community. So it was great to host that event in our region. So thank you to the Bridgewater and Area Chamber of Commerce for that. Anything else from the council? Deputy Mayor?
Yes, I just mentioned next weekend's the South Shore Expo is returning to the LCLC, so that's Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. So they're, I see the banners are down on King Street, so look for more details. I believe it's Friday evening, all day Saturday, and part of Sunday. So that more details will be out on social media.
Perfect. And of course, South Shore Lumberjacks have made it to the next round of the playoffs. So the Expo's in 2 weeks, right? It's not this
Oh,
weekend,
sorry,
next
2
week-
weeks,
next
yes.
weekend, right.
Yeah, I'm
'Cause
getting my,
there's-
yeah.
there's-
It's the weekend of the 12th, yeah.
Right.
Right, so I'm
And,
jumping ahead.
But there is hockey Friday and Saturday. I think both weekend games are in Bridgewater, I think, so. Sure to be sold out again. Also, I'd just like to make our proclamations are generally on the town's website and Facebook page, but I do want to recognize that April 1st is going to be Royal Canadian Air Force Day in the town of Bridgewater to commemorate the 100th anniversary of the Royal Canadian Air Force, and to honor the men and women of that service. So that proclamation will be posted on the town's Facebook page and on the town's website. If there's nothing else, we will move to minutes. We have the minutes of the March 11th regular council meeting. Any errors or omissions with those? Hearing none, can I have a motion to approve the minutes? Councillor McDonald, seconded by Councillor Thorburn. All those in favor? Those opposed? Motion is carried. Thank you. And we're down to planning items, and we have a public hearing for Lot 200 on Glen Allen. So just for a little bit of clarity for the public, because this can get confusing for me, so it probably is for others, maybe not. So we will adjourn the council meeting, and then we will enter into the public hearing. I will note that all the statutory requirements have been met for the public hearing. And for this particular one, so MPS and LUB amendments, there is no appeal to the URB, right? Didn't want to forget that. And so what will happen is staff will speak, and then if the applicant is here, they will speak, and then I will open it up to the public if there's any comments, and we usually start with those for, and then those against, and then we will adjourn the public hearing, return to council session for decision. So with that, I will now commence our public hearing, open that up, and turn it over to staff.
Hello, council. I apologize for my speaking notes. They're not popping up on the computer here, so I might be looking down here a little more than I'd like.
No worries.
I will be looking over or reviewing the application for the redesignation and rezoning of Lot 200 for this public hearing. Located on, and Lot 200 is located on Glen Allen Drive. In this presentation, I'll be discussing the rezoning and redesignation amendments, so I'll briefly outline what those are before I get started. The town has a municipal planning strategy, or MPS, and a land use bylaw, LUB. The MPS is a policy document that outlines how council envisions the town to develop. It has a future land use map, which separates the different areas of the town into different designations, showing generally what type of development is envisioned where. If there's an application to change a designation on a property, this is called a redesignation. The LUB is more detailed. It regulates development to ensure the MPS policies are followed by regulating things like what uses are permitted where, how much parking is required, what setbacks are required, and more. It includes a zoning map which separates the properties into different zones, which have different rules. If there's an application to change a zone on a property, this is called a rezoning. And a rezoning has to follow the designation for the property as it is outlined in the future land use map. Therefore, if it doesn't, it would not only require a rezoning, but a redesignation as well. My apologies, I'm switching the wrong slides here already. The next slide's a context map, just identifying the property on Glen Allen. The property is outlined in bold lines there, and it abuts HB Studios, Bridgewater Baptist Church, and Generations Active Park. The property is approximately 1.5 acres, or 0.6 hectares in area, with 120 meters of frontage on Glen Allen and an average depth of 45 meters. This is an excerpt of the future land use map, an illustrated depiction of intended future land uses found within the MPS. The dark red color identifies the limited commercial designation, with the subject property again outlined in the bolded line. To enable a map amendment to the zoning map, the first step would be to redesignate the property on the future land use map displayed here. To allow the development of 3 and 4 unit townhouses, the comprehensive residential designation would be most appropriate designation to pursue, identified by the yellow on the map. This is an excerpt of the zoning map, a graphic representation of zones described in the land use bylaw, or LUB. As seen, the property is adjacent to the recreation zone in green, the institutional zone in blue, and the comprehensive residential zone in yellow again. The property again is outlined in that bolded line and is in the neighborhood commercial zone currently. Following this preliminary overview of the subject property, we'll now be discussing the application for redesignation and rezoning. The town recently completed a sale of the subject property to the Housing Trust of Nova Scotia, which included an agreement of purchase and sale conditioned upon the redesignation and rezoning of the property. The application proposed a redesignation from a limited commercial to the comprehensive residential designation, an amendment on the future land use map, and a concurrent rezoning from the residential commercial C7 zone to the comprehensive residential R3 zone. In addition to the applicant's requested amendments, any application for map amendments must identify a proposed use in their application. It is important to note that the proposed use is not a development application and has not received any permitting, and therefore may not be constructed on the site following these proposed amendments. It's still important to know, to understand the intention of the applicant and their application for the amendments. As stated in policy IM3 of the municipal planning strategy, any application for amendment to the land use bylaw requires the applicant to identify a proposed use for the property. As stated in the previous slide, the applicant's proposal is not mandated to be constructed, and therefore council shall give consideration to both the proposed use and the impact of any other uses that would be permitted in the requested zone. In this case, the applicant has identified an intended use of the property to develop 5 blocks of townhouses with 4 units each for a total of 20 units. In each zone, there are permitted uses identified in 3 forms of approval processes: as of right, site plan approval, and development agreement. As of right identifies permitted uses that may be developed if a property meets all the policies and regulations of the land use bylaw. Site plan approval identifies permitted uses that include additional requirements, including but not limited to the location of structures, the location of off-street parking, location and number of driveway openings, and the retention of vegetation, including many others. The site plan approval process is intended to mitigate negative impacts on abutting properties and property owners. Generally, developments through a site plan approval process are slightly larger and more impactful than those permitted as of right. Because site plan approvals are brought to council during their negotiation and approval process, additional requirements outlined above would be considered by council, at which time the applicant puts forward their application for development and said approval process. This is just a disclaimer indicating that the following slides are conceptual in rendering. So these are just some renderings of the proposed use on the site. And again, renderings, very conceptual. To reiterate, the application is for concurrent MPS and LEB map amendments. The MPS amendment, a map amendment to the future land use map, would redesignate the property from a limited commercial designation to a comprehensive residential designation. The LEB amendment, a map amendment to the zoning map, would rezone the property from a special commercial C7 zone to a comprehensive residential R3 zone. On January 24th, 2024 at 6 p.m., a public participation meeting was held at the town hall where 4 members of the public, 1 member of the media, as well as 5 individuals on behalf of the applicant attended. Issues raised at the public participation meeting included concerns regarding the adequacy of on-site parking, questions regarding the traffic impact on the area, concerns relating to the density of the development, and questions relating to the permitted number of units on the site, property management, specifically snow removal, and how the units would be marketed. Staff completed a policy analysis, which can be found in the planning analysis report. However, I'll be outlining some of the more notable policies found in the analysis. Firstly, staff reviewed MPS objectives and reviewed the applicable objectives, being MPS objectives 2, 3, 4, and 6, controlling land use and development in a manner that will minimize conflicts between land uses and in a manner that is compatible with the town's service infrastructure, mix compatible land uses to promote diverse and convenient neighborhoods, encourage compact development to maximize the town's shared infrastructure and promote healthy, close-knit neighborhoods, and enable the development of a full range of housing options so that people can live out their lives in Bridgewater. There were also commercial policies, commercial development policies that staff analyzed, including C1, establish future land use designations and zones to accommodate a range of commercial uses in services and strategic areas. C4, control land use and development to minimize conflicts between land uses and in a manner compatible with the town's infrastructure. And C5, establish setbacks and buffer requirements to minimize land use conflicts where new commercial development abuts existing residential areas and parks. There are also residential development policies which staff analyzed, including Policy R2, R3, R5, R9, and R10. Minimize conflict between land uses, support full range of housing options and styles, require the integration of sidewalks, pedestrian connections, and bicycle parking, promote residential densification in strategic areas, and encourage context-sensitive residential infill. There are additional policies in terms of transportation, which included the review of the adequacy of street networks and active transportation infrastructure, the adequacy of site access, location of pedestrian walkways and related infrastructure, a review of the ability for emergency services to respond to an emergency, requirements for parking, and off-street parking and loading facilities. More specifically, in terms of transportation, the site was reviewed regarding the adequacy of the road network leading to the development. The site is located on a straight section of Glen Allen, close to the entrance of HB Studios and the Bridgewater Baptist Church. Heavy traffic flows from both HB Studios and the Baptist Church can cause congestion on Glen Allen. However, it is uncommon for either space to be regularly busy. Due to the nature of HB Studios as an indoor sports facility, activity takes place primarily in the winter or colder months. However, the space is used all year round. For larger events, street parking is available with significant availability within proximity to these facilities. Additional parking for HB Studio, the site of HB Studio has been considered by staff through future improvement to Generations Active Park. Glen Allen Drive itself was designed as a collective street capable of heavy traffic flows. Currently, traffic flows on Glen Allen are limited. The street is designed to accommodate significant increases in traffic as well as street parking. Street networks are adequate for emergency services to respond. However, on-site emergency access will be determined during the site plan approval process. The property is to be addressed as per the civic numbering bylaw. Other aspects that will be considered through the site plan approval process would be parking requirements, the adequacy of site access based on the proposed driveway locations, and the adequacy of site access. Finally, the property is sited within 20 meters of the Centennial Trail and contains existing sidewalk infrastructure for active transportation infrastructure. Infrastructure is also analyzed when making amendments to the LUB. Upon review of the downstream wastewater capacity report, it appears that the Glen Allen collection system has capacity to support the subject rezoning application. Final determination will be made at the time of permit approval. Any necessary upgrades will be the responsibility of the developer unless council decides otherwise. Existing service laterals connected to the property shall either be used for the proposed development or removed if unused to avoid unnecessary and unnoticed leakages. There are requirements that stormwater flows occurring after the development is completed cannot be more than what already existed on the site. The stormwater management plan will be approved by the town engineer prior to building permit issuance. Wastewater betterment charge would be applied as with any other development. Now we will be reviewing the applicant's proposed amendments. Staff received an application to rezone the property at Lot 200 from the residential commercial C7 zone to the comprehensive residential R3 zone. To enable a rezoning, the property first needs to be redesignated from the limited commercial to the comprehensive residential designation on the future land use map. This slide shows the proposed MPS amendments on an excerpt from the future land use map. Here you can see the proposed amendments in the redesignation from the limited commercial designation in the purple to the comprehensive residential designation in yellow. Following the proposed redesignation in the previous slide, this would enable the rezoning of the subject property at Lot 200. This slide shows the proposed LUB amendments on an excerpt from a draft zoning map. Here you see the proposed rezoning from the neighborhood commercial C7 zone in red to the comprehensive residential R3 zone in yellow. The proposed redesignation and rezoning would result result in changes to the zone requirements and permitted uses. The successful rezoning from the neighborhood commercial zone would remove the opportunity to develop commercial uses on the property. As of right permissions would be the same between the two zones, allowing both single unit and 2 unit dwellings in each zone. Both zones permit up to 4 unit dwellings by site plan approval. However, the existing neighborhood commercial zone requires that the ground floor feature a commercial component. Additionally, the proposed comprehensive residential R3 zone enables the possibility of subdividing townhouses onto separate lots. In analyzing the proposed MPS and LUB amendments, it is important to analyze the maximum development potential of the site for the existing and proposed zone. The maximum development potential for the subject property in the neighborhood commercial C7 zone would be 6 multi-unit structures, each containing 4 units and a ground floor commercial component, resulting in 24 units and 6 commercial spaces. The proposed amendments would retain the existing residential development potential of 24 residential units. However, it would eliminate the potential and the requirement for ground floor commercial. These residential units could be in the form of 6 multi-unit residential buildings or 6 4-unit townhouses, each with their unit located on their own lot. The main question most residents would be now, how would this affect my property? The subject property's existing zoning, neighborhood commercial C7 zone, was developed to be a low-impact residentially focused commercial zone. For this reason, there are no existing abutting yard requirements. Given the property is being proposed for the comprehensive residential zone, there will be no change in abutting yard requirements. There are some other considerations in terms of transportation and servicing that we've taken into account. This is a policy of council to encourage the retention of existing trees and vegetation in new multi-unit residential developments and all projects permitted through site plan approval. Section 4.1.8 of the LUB requires the following: a minimum of 40% of the front and flankage yard on any residential lot be covered by vegetation. Any multi-unit residential development shall require a minimum of at least 1 native tree planted in the front yard for every 538 square feet of total front yard area, and where possible, existing trees and vegetation shall be retained during the early development stages. Additionally, parking requirements will be, as discussed before, parking requirements would be determined in the site plan approval process for multi-unit, for townhomes. A minimum of 1 vehicle parking space would be required per unit. Both multi and townhomes would require 0.5 bicycle spaces per unit. Reiterating the sanitary, sewer, and water service concerns, grading and alteration in elevation and or contour of the land shall minimize erosion and sedimentation, as well as other negative impacts on neighboring properties. Any existing laterals shall be removed unless used in the development. And finally, a stormwater management plan must be submitted to the town engineer before building permit issuance. If the rezoning of the subject property is successful, to develop the intended concept, the site plan approval would require criteria set out in 4.1.10, site plan approval criteria for development in residential zones. Some of the notable criteria would include the location of structures on the lot, making sure they don't negatively impact surrounding neighborhood, retaining existing vegetation where vegetation is healthy and minimizes negative impacts, grading and alteration of the land minimizes negative impacts, and again, stormwater and surface water is addressed with plans being approved by the engineer. Finally, the recommendation: it is recommended that Town Council for the Town of Bridgewater give second and final consideration to the map amendments in the MPS and LUB.
Great, thanks, Connor. Questions of the planner at this time? Councilor Tanner?
Connor, we were looking at traffic and so on, I assume you looked at other developments that are proposed for that area, some of the larger ones, and how that would impact Glen Allen? And
Yeah, we did consider the larger developments. Ultimately, the site, the Glen Allen is a collector street and does have the capacity to take on large amounts of additional traffic.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And just for my own clarification, because you said this, but right now, if we didn't rezone it, you can have commercial with 24 residential units.
Exactly.
So, and we're rezoning it, it's still 24 residential units.
Yeah, you're just eliminating that ground floor component, or commercial component that would be required with the residential units.
I think that the number staying the same is certainly quite important to me in terms of when you're rezoning, the impact is.
It actually could be lesser
It's
because of that commercial requirement in the C7 zone, whereas that could incur additional cars or individuals on the lot, whereas, yeah, that requirement wouldn't be a requirement for the C3, or R3 zone. My apologies.
Other questions? Councilor Thorburn?
Just two. I see that nice drawing there, but I don't see any power poles or anything there. I'm assuming they're going to be overhead, not underground.
I would assume as well, although that is conceptual, so that wasn't taken into account for those renderings.
And number two, I guess there's adequate fire flow there for the fire service in case of emergency?
Again, that would be considered in the site plan approval process.
Okay.
So prior to permit issuance, there would be another presentation to council, just to, yeah, get feedback and go through that process.
And that plans will go to the fire chief for approval as well, just to look at?
I may have to defer to Nick on that one.
Councilor Thorburn. Yeah, so just to be clear, the site plan approval process won't come back through council.
Okay.
That would be in case of appeal. No problem. But the site plan approval process also won't look at fire flows.
Okay.
That would be something to do through the rezoning, but because the density isn't changing from the existing zoning to the target zone, or the maximum permitted density, that is, in the number of units that could be achieved on this property, we didn't have a fire flow analysis done. It wasn't asked of the applicant to do.
Okay, thank you.
You had to raise the power pole question, so now it's stuck in my head. So anyone who's driven down Glen Allen knows that shortly after the street was extended and some of the units were put in there, Nova Scotia Power decided to put many poles in front of houses. So is there a way to ensure that they do not replicate what they did before? Do we have a mechanism to do that, or is it just kind of an ask Nova Scotia Power nicely not to do that?
Again, I may have to defer.
I see Nick's nodding. Yeah. So okay. So, darn. Okay. So
good.
We should probably make sure we communicate that to Nova Scotia Power. Pretty safe to assume that nobody wants 24 poles in front of 24 units, which is essentially what happened at the other time. So, okay, we'll leave that to us, I guess. Okay,
Any other questions?
Other questions? Okay, I believe there is a presentation by the applicant, so we'll ask the applicant to come on forward and give your presentation.
Good evening, Council. My name is Darian Chakrinia. I'm a junior planner with Fathom Studio, and I'm joined by Megan Mariano from the Nova Scotia Housing Trust. We're super excited to be here tonight. I want to apologize. I have a bit of a cough. Additionally, I've been told by others if I weren't a planner, I should be an auctioneer because of how fast I talk. So if anybody has any trouble understanding me tonight, or I'm talking too fast, give me a shout and I'll slow things down. Connor did a really good job going over the policy background and the amendments that are being asked for tonight. So we're going to give you a bit of a different look at the project. We're going over the background and goals of the Housing Trust, and also a bit of rationale for the request and why it makes sense at this property. So I'll pass it off to Megan to talk about the Housing Trust.
Good evening, Council. Thank you for allowing us to speak here today. My name is Megan Mariano. I'm a project manager with the Housing Trust, and with me today I also have Angela Bishop, our Executive Director. just wanted to briefly introduce ourselves. We're a not-for-profit organization providing housing for the working class of Nova Scotia as well as affordable housing. Currently, we own 295 units based in Halifax and Dartmouth, and we're renovating the old buildings so they're more comfortable, more sustainable, and better for the tenants. Our goal is to acquire and build 1,000 units by 2030, and that is by transitioning private sector buildings into affordable housing as well as new construction. We operate based on a mixed income model whereby a portion of our tenants pay slightly below market rent, and that profit is used to subsidize our other tenants who are provided with affordable housing. How do I go next? Sorry. So our application in Bridgewater is part of our modular housing for healthcare workers. We're working with the government to provide a minimum of 50 units around the province, so we've designated this site for 20 units. This program addresses two pressing social issues: the lack of housing for healthcare workers and the shortage of affordable housing. So our initiative is to attract healthcare workers to Bridgewater to provide healthcare services to the community, as well as encourage permanent settlement. So they stay, they become a part of the community, help grow the community, and hopefully transition out of these houses so we can bring more healthcare workers. The initiative is based on modular housing, so a lot of people ask why. It's efficient, there's reduced waste, it reduces construction time on site, and there's a lot of quality control when these are manufactured off-site. And again, this initiative will be based on our mixed income model as well, where a portion of the tenants will be given housing slightly less than market, and then others will be more heavily subsidized as affordable housing. And then just for more information, we also have other active sites in Lunenburg and Guysborough with this modular housing for healthcare workers. I think that's it from me. I'll pass it off to Darian. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Megan. Excuse me. So on screen here, I have a map of the site, a context map. So for those of you in front of me or from the public who aren't super familiar with the site, it's located on Glen Allen Drive in the east of Bridgewater. And if you draw a 1 kilometer buffer around the site, there are a number of amenities nearby that make it a really great spot for development. So there's the Heath Ball Fields, Centennial Trail, the HP Studios, which can all promote an active lifestyle. There's the existing commercial area, and perhaps most importantly for this development, the South Shore Hospital. So this is modular housing for healthcare workers, and that proximity to the hospital is a great amenity for this one site. Here is the conceptual site plan that was submitted as a part of our application. As Connor mentioned, even though this is just a rezoning application, we are required to provide a proposed use for the development. So we provided the conceptual site plan, which is as close to what we are proposing for the site as possible. Everything you see on screen here meets the existing requirements of the land use bylaw if this site were rezoned to comprehensive residential. So that's the setbacks, the parking requirements for townhomes, and the vegetation in the front yard, among other requirements. And as was mentioned earlier, it's a proposal for 5 clusters, 4 townhouses each, so 20 units in total. So I have a few things to consider rationale-wise and why the site makes sense that I wanted to bring up tonight. If you look at the pie chart here, you can see this is a breakdown of the housing types that are currently existing in Bridgewater, or at least as of the 2021 census. I apologize for the movable dwelling figure. That's supposed to say 11.7%, not 48. But the main thing to show here is that there isn't a whole lot of housing diversity in Bridgewater. You folks all live here, so I'm sure you know that the primary housing type in the community is single detached dwellings, and that's followed by apartments. So there really only are 2 major forms of housing in the community, and this lack of housing diversity is an issue for affordability and for keeping different people in the community. So when you want to, help grow your community, you're trying to appeal to people of all ages, incomes, backgrounds, etc. And you think about different groups that may not want or be able to support a single detached dwelling or an apartment, they're getting left out of this equation. So townhouses currently only make up around 2.2% of Bridgewater's housing stock. And when you think about young families, young working professionals, people who may be working in the healthcare sector especially, they may not have their housing needs met by what's currently in Bridgewater and may be pushed out by the housing market. So by allowing for different housing types like townhouses to be built, helping promote housing diversity in the community, and that gets built in, right? Once these units are here, they're here for the long term, and so you're building in housing affordability and diversity into the community. At the same time, I've shown a 100-foot buffer around the site. When you're doing a rezoning, one of the considerations obviously is compatible uses. You worry about how proposed or possible uses may exist or meld with the existing community. In this case, we are asking to rezone to the zone that is most common around. The R3 zone is the existing kind of context of the neighborhood, but still when it comes to townhouses, there may be that concern that it may not, jive with the existing built form. But in this case, there are very few neighbors to the site, which is kind of a bonus of it. There's a lot lower chance for any kind of conflict than there would be with another rezoning perchance. At the same time, talking about townhouses, density gets brought up a lot, and so I wanted to show off this graph here. Kind of shows the scale of density going from smallest to largest. So when it comes to your average single-family development, it averages around 10 dwelling units per acre. So the DU AC is dwelling units per acre there. And then as you move up to high-rise housing, cluster housing, et cetera, you get to 100+ units, dwelling units per acre. In this case, the proposed development is only 13.5 dwelling units per acre. So at the absolute lowest end of townhouses, and very much comparable to the existing context of the single-family neighborhood around it, kind of going to show that it really isn't that different from the existing context. At the same time, when it comes to, the context, I would like to point out that up the street, 6 houses up, there are townhouses, just like the ones they're proposing, similar density and scale to them. So it is already a land use that's in the community, which is something to note. And like Connor mentioned, it's on a collector street, the property. So this is the only reason why townhouses would be even possible through site plan approval, is because the bylaw only allows them on collector roads. These streets are able to accommodate a higher flow of traffic. So when it comes to traffic concerns, the relatively low traffic generation from the site will be able to be accommodated by the collector street. Again, here's some conceptual renders. We already saw this earlier, but I threw them in just to mention that these are mainly for massing purposes to get an idea of the scale of the site. So you can see them in the context of the road, each other, cars, etc. Get an idea for how the site will fit into the streetscape. But again, these are conceptual. Like I was pointed out at the last meeting, the stairs are there on the site. They are modular units and likely won't have basements or anything, so there likely won't be stairs in the final version, but it just gives you an idea of the scale of the site. And so I'm wrapping up this presentation. It's pretty short and sweet. I want to just kind of emphasize that what we're asking for, the rezoning, is to the predominant zone nearby. It's the existing context. The townhouses that are part of the conceptual site plan could be built on the majority of the properties nearby the site, but this relatively small zoning change back to the R3 zone will enable a new type of, underrepresented housing type in Bridgewater, promote affordability, and will help keep skilled workers and healthcare workers in the community for longer, help them establish their lives here in Bridgewater. But that's all for me. I welcome any questions from council. I thank you for listening to us tonight.
Thank you for your presentation. Questions from members of council? No? We covered all the bases, I
All the
guess.
bases.
All right, perfect.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. So now we'll move to comments from the public. I don't know, is there anyone here from the public who wishes to make a comment we go in order of favor, then opposed, and any other comments? So I don't really see anyone. I know that we did receive one comment opposed, so is that your job to read that?
Yeah.
Okay. Such enthusiasm. Yep.
Yep. So this was received from a resident in the area, Peter Jardine, who is a resident in Glen Allen Drive. And I'll just pick it up where some of the concerns are raised. And it had to do with some of the assertions presented by the planning department during the review of the amendment application. It was implied that HB Studios is not normally busy. HB Studios is probably the busiest it's ever been. It's now the norm to have a large number of cars in the parking lot, both daytime and evening hours. At special soccer events, etc., it's very common to have a large overflow onto the street. This past tournament, I took a couple of pictures of the cars lined all in front of the proposed lot, in addition to in front of neighboring properties. And we also have a dog park and mailbox pickup exiting from here. Staff implied the lot could handle adequate parking with sufficient street overflow space. Lot 200 is less than 400 feet total frontage with a proposal of 20 units total, and each unit 15 feet wide. Factoring in 40% green frontage, this leaves less than 10-foot wide driveways. Furthermore, the street overflow parking is on the same side as the lot, and common sense would dictate there will be no room available with all the driveway openings. The opposite side of the street cannot be used, as it is largely for the entrance to the church in Drumlin Hills, plus the bus stop. It is fair to say the proposed development will have a minimum of 30 cars, and with an average of 1.5 cars per household, given they are family units. This would undoubtedly lead to further breaking of the current green frontage bylaw, which is loosely enforced, as it can be witnessed by the current townhouses on Glen Allen and also by the newer triplex development on Etna. This in turn lowers neighboring property values and contradicts the impression given when we paid the high prices for these lots in 2014 under the assumption they were single-family lots. I pay over $7,000 in property taxes and frankly do not want my street frontage used as a daily overflow parking space. The proposed 450-unit development a few hundred feet downward will already make the street considerably busier. In context, that is approximately 10% of the current town population added to this 25-acre site. It will also bring the per-acre population density of our neighborhood up significantly. People move to towns from cities, largely to get away from this per-acre density. Compacting 2015 wide units on Lot 200 will further add to this, and with the exits from HB Studios, Baptist Church, and Drumlin Hills will create some added traffic safety issues. A quick drive down Glen Allen and Etna, and it is evident that 40% green front bylaw has been broken by the current 4-unit townhouses and triplexes. Where is the guarantee that they will enforce this with rentals? Also, where will they put the snow removed from these narrow front lots? In summary, the issue is not with the development, rather the number of units on the lot. This lot should have 10 to 12 units at maximum.
Okay, I think staff have addressed some of these. I don't know if we want to, council has questions they want for clarification on some of these. I know that I had a discussion with the gentleman at Talk Bridgewater and certainly explained that at least for the snow removal wouldn't be something we would consider in a rezoning. Everyone is responsible to remove their snow if they so choose from their property and not put it in the street. Mm-hmm. So whether they put it on their front lawn or put it on their backyard or somewhere else, that wouldn't be something that we would capture. It's certainly not something that council would deliberate on. I think we did cover off on the parking because it's the same number of units
yeah.
Whether we rezone or not.
It's actually probably less parking, given that the commercial, as staff pointed out, the commercial would no longer be enabled with this rezoning,
right.
So it would just be residential.
Yeah, fewer
so
cars,
less traffic.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's that. I'm just trying to go through some of the points here, and then I did get some clarification. Nick, correct me if I'm wrong. That for some of the so for that the green frontage bylaw, I think the units that were being referenced predate that bylaw, and so that there's nothing to enforce in that situation because they're not infringing on the bylaw because they were built before that came into effect. So thank you. I know parking is a big issue in Bridgewater, but I do want to note that the rezoning is probably has a less of an impact on parking than if we didn't, as you noted. Mm-hmm. So I do, as always, if Mr. Jardine was here, I would say I very much appreciate him reaching out to council. It's never easy to to either have a letter read or stand in front of council and express views that that you may feel are supported or not supported. So I do appreciate him taking the time to write that, and I would encourage him to, if he has additional questions, to reach out to us or staff. I hope that we've addressed some of these concerns or that the presentation has addressed some of these concerns. Are there any other questions from council of any of the staff or applicant? Okay, so I will now close the public hearing and reconvene our regular council meeting. And so We've had the presentations. I would ask if someone's prepared to put a motion on the floor. Councillor Thorburn, thank you.
Will, Your Worship. I would move that Town Council for the Town of Bridgewater give second and final consideration to bylaw Chapter 208, amendments to the municipal planning strategy and land use bylaw 2024 to 1, redesignate PID 606-58580 from limited commercial to comprehensive residential in the future land use map of the municipal planning strategy, Appendix A, and 2, rezone PID 606-58580 from neighborhood commercial C7 zone to comprehensive R3 zone in the zoning map on the land use bylaw Appendix B.
Thank you. Seconded by Councillor McDonald. Further discussion? I'll just throw in that I'm excited by this. We need more housing. We need more affordable housing. We need more healthcare workers. So this checks every one of those boxes for our community. That it's modular housing means that it will arrive sooner than the traditional build. So I just see this as a good news story. Certainly the public that I've spoken to have had questions about this. Saw its location as prime on the transit route on the same street as the hospital. Again, I just see this as a win for the town, and appreciate the province and the Housing Trust for having faith in our community for this. So I will certainly be speaking in favor of the motion. Ready for the question?
Question.
Question being called. All those in favor? Those opposed? Motion is carried unanimously. Thank you. Thank you to staff. I skipped past the delegations part at the beginning. So before we go to notice of intention, I should have, at the earlier part, asked if there are any members of the public that wish to speak on any other matters. Now is your chance. Just looking at you, Joey, not just because your hands up. You're the only member of the public. That's coming. Okay. Okay, then we'll move down to 6.2, which is Notice of Intention, Chapter 201, Sidewalk Cafe Bylaw Amendments. And looking at Santa. All right. Welcome, Santa, to come back down and review this one.
Good evening, Council, Mayor. I'm here to discuss the proposed text amendments to the Town Sidewalk Cafe bylaw. In April 2023, an approved sidewalk cafe on King Street attracted significant public attention and drew the interest of Town Council. Specifically, two key aspects came under scrutiny: the enclosure and the overall appearance. Numerous concerns were voiced, particularly regarding the height of the public barrier and its impact on the streetscape. In response to the direction provided by Council, our team embarked on a comprehensive review of the existing sidewalk cafe bylaw. Our objective was to identify and evaluate potential issues, deficiencies, and necessary changes. Take a closer look at this picture. The photo on the right illustrates a sidewalk cafe on King Street where the visual obstruction of the public sidewalk emerged as a primary concern. The height, material, and transparency percentage of the public barriers have become focal points for discussion. In contrast, the photo on the left showcases an alternative design for a King Street sidewalk cafe. Here, an adequately open public barrier allows for the continuation of visual sightlines for pedestrians. Staff prioritized addressing design concerns regarding the sidewalk cafe and temporary sidewalk. We began by compiling a comprehensive discussion paper on sidewalk cafe design, drawing from best practices, case studies, and guidelines from various cities. We also examined the sidewalk cafe bylaws from Nova Scotian towns to understand existing regulations. Based on our research, we created a detailed list of relevant features and standards. From this analysis, we drafted proposed text amendments to address concerns while maintaining public space vitality and integrity. The staff have endeavored to consider all facets of a sidewalk cafe design, including portions of the existing sidewalk cafe bylaw, including the definitions, application site plan requirements, sidewalk use and temporary sidewalks, public barrier, design, awnings, access, lighting, and removal of sidewalk cafe fixtures. The Community Development Department's objectives align with the MPS, Municipal Planning Strategy, support the proposed changes. The concerns raised by a downtown Bridgewater sidewalk cafe highlight the focus on enhancing and preserving the historic downtown area. Well-designed cafes contribute to the town's appearance, fostering a sense of place and encouraging pedestrian activity. Temporary sidewalks as the key part of sidewalk cafes promotes safe, accessible spaces aligning with community objectives. These factors drive the review of the sidewalk cafe bylaw and staff's proposal for new amendments. In this regard, staff proposed a new definition for temporary sidewalk within the definition section 3, to provide more clarity. Within the temporary sidewalk section 15, 3 amendments are proposed, including addressing gaps on the temporary sidewalk surface, clarifying the transition angle between the public sidewalk and the temporary sidewalk, and ensuring that the construction of the temporary sidewalk does not obstruct any street drainage systems. The proposed amendment to the public barrier section 17, aims to provide further clarification regarding the height of barriers. In the design section 18, staff proposed a new requirement concerning public barrier transparency. Staff recommends a minimum 50% transparency requirement for the barrier, ensuring the maintenance of visual sidelines. The inclusion of an awning section, new section 20, addresses the amount of space an awning may occupy on a sidewalk cafe. The proposed additions detail the design and height requirements for an awning to be met through a sidewalk cafe application submission. Regarding the access section, a proposed change involves increasing the minimum required width of the unobstructed access to the building from 1 meter to 1.2 meters. The addition also clarifies that an unobstructed walkway refers to the full distance from an elevated public sidewalk or temporary sidewalk to the food and beverage establishment. Staff have introduced a provision stipulating to the lighting section that lighting must not cause glare on adjacent properties. Additionally, lighting is now included in the site plan requirements for application purposes. Finally, a proposed addition to the removal of sidewalk cafe fixtures section introduces a new provision requiring the restoration of streets, sidewalks, and municipal property to their original condition at the end of the season. The staff have prioritized addressing the accessibility aspect of sidewalk cafe design, incorporating the standards outlined in the Accessible Design for the Built Environment of the National Standard of Canada, drafted in 2023. Moreover, the draft proposed Built Environment Accessibility Standard package served as a reference for verifying and aligning proposed design measures with the most current documentation. The interim accessibility guidelines for indoor and outdoor spaces were also utilized to ensure accessibility considerations were adequately addressed in anticipation of the proposed text amendments to the current sidewalk cafe bylaw. Also, staff have leveraged feedback from Nova Scotia Health, Public Health, and Healthy Communities to strengthen the bylaw from a health-promoting, protective, and supporting standpoint. While small changes are proposed to improve accessibility, The bulk of the amendments in consideration of best practice and standards with respect to accessibility are not included. Staff decided instead to scope as directed by Council to remove obstructions from the public, in addition to proposing the small accessibility-related amendments. As such, staff will endeavor to bring back the bylaw in the future to seek direction on further amendment in consideration of accessible design. In this regard, staff have identified this recommended option for Town Council to give first reading of the proposed amendments to Chapter 201 Sidewalk Cafe Bylaw. Thank you.
Thank you, Santa. Questions from members of council? Yes. Councilor Conklin?
What's the definition of a sidewalk cafe fixture? That would just be basically everything that they put out there?
Yes, I think that the permanent components, it could be related to that. And I believe that Nick's gonna take care of this question more if, yeah. Thank you.
Yes, Councillor Conklin. A fixture is really anything that that is involved with the sidewalk cafe.
Second. Yeah, thanks.
Yep. Other questions?
Yep. Awning. So awning. So I guess what's the maximum size? Is it in relation to the square footage of the temporary cafe, or?
Yeah, I prefer just to not say yes or no for now, because these are the details that we will consider more in the review. But we just considered this awning section, but we didn't really address the specific height or specific numbers.
Gotcha. Thanks. Sorry, I'll be like Andrew. Sorry, just one more.
Don't apologize.
Okay, so what are all of these proposed amendments here because of the example given on for the sidewalk cafe in King Street, or is it more like, okay, yeah, we're doing some of these changes because of that, but also through our research for, with other municipalities and their sidewalk cafe bylaws, we thought this might be a good thing to add as well?
Yeah, I think that the main reason is the primary concern came from the King Street sidewalk cafe that we had. That was the start point, just to do research and reviews.
Yeah. So have there been any, issues or complaints from the public with respect to outdoor lighting?
I am not sure. Yep.
Staff haven't received any complaints with respect to outdoor lighting. So just to build off of Santa's last response, the issue came about because of a specific sidewalk cafe installation on King Street. However, through staff, the research component of this process, other things have been brought in, other amendments have been introduced based on best practice in that jurisdictional scan, as you mentioned, Councillor Conklin. So, yes, a good portion of the amendments relate to what we've seen in the past on King Street. Other amendments are more so just to bring the sidewalk cafe bylaw up to date and in line with best practices across Nova Scotia and beyond.
Thank you.
I just wanted to ask a question. I know Councillor Conklin brought up about asking about awnings or other obstructions that may for example, block sight line or visibility. We've got parking, back-end angle parking on, in that area. So I'm just wondering how staff are going to determine, you know, when we look at sight lines, is it going to be, are you going to put in the amendments with exactly size restrictions? Are you going to do it on a case-by-case basis? I'm just curious when you've got parking there and sight lines and how we're going to work around that.
So the idea is to keep an open appearance. So one of the proposed amendments deals with the height of the public barrier. So that would be the barrier between the sidewalk, be it the temporary sidewalk or the permanent elevated sidewalk, and the sidewalk cafe. So that is that division between the space where people are sitting and where people are then walking. So to clarify that shall only be a maximum of 1 meter in height, whereas now it lacks clarity in staff's opinion. So to actually bring that clarity in will ensure that public barrier, so when you're walking down the sidewalk, that will be only a maximum 1 meter in height, so 3+ feet in height. So you should be able to see through beyond, over and beyond the sidewalk cafe. Additionally, there's a transparency factor built into the proposed amendment, so that even that public barrier would still have to be, would additionally have to be 50% transparent. Because the public barrier, it's just creating an obstruction between where people are sitting and people are walking. And it's only required when there's an alcohol component to the sidewalk cafe. So it's an obstruction, so it doesn't have to be opaque in any way, it just needs to be there. So to actually bring in a transparency factor is another way to create that open appearance. With the awning, the idea there is just to allow businesses who have decided to install a sidewalk cafe to have some shelter. So it would be, again, you know, if we treat it like we treat canopies and awnings today on sidewalks with the land use bylaw, it would be 10 feet in height, and it shouldn't obstruct the view as you're looking down the sidewalk approaching a sidewalk cafe. It would be effectively a shelter, but it wouldn't have walls and then roof. It would be a roof shelter, and then with the public barriers being 1 meter in height, there would be that wide or high opening for people to see through, so that it doesn't appear like you're walking into a wall. It doesn't appear like the sidewalk is disappearing. You can see it on the other side. It just creates more or provides more attention to the fact that you can get around this and that there is sidewalk access.
Councillor Conklin.
So the public barrier, are you saying that they will not, I guess what you're proposing is that they cannot be opaque?
Not fully opaque.
Thanks.
Other questions from staff? I mean, I'll just add that as I'm going through this, what I see is just some additional refinement and clarity since we've had the sidewalk bylaw for quite some time and haven't really made that many amendments. I think the last amendment we made was to change to allow into parking lot for the other King Street businesses. But I see some consistency with what you see around the province and arguably around the country where, you know, you can still see through the continuation of the sidewalk while allowing some ability to have some separation for food and alcohol. So I see it bringing some consistency because as Nick said, it was the ability to interpret it different ways was there, and this will kind of make sure we're all on the same page. So that, to me, that's what a bylaw should be. It should be very clear, and so this adds some clarity. So, other questions from council? Other comments from staff? No? Someone prepared to make a motion? Deputy Mayor Frazier?
Yes, Your Worship. I'll make a motion that Town Council for the Town of Bridgewater conduct first reading of a revised Chapter 201 Sidewalk Cafe bylaw dated March 25th, 2024, and give notice of its intention to conduct second and final reading at a council meeting to be held on April 22nd, 2024, and authorize the municipal clerk to publish all public notices pursuant to Section 168 of the Municipal Government Act.
Okay, do I have a seconder? Councillor McDonald. We've had a good discussion. Ready for the question?
Question.
Question's been called. All those in favor? Those opposed? Motion is carried. Thank you. Thank you, Santa. We are down to reports and recommendations and waste collection contract service levels.
The Municipal Joint Services Board provides the service of overseeing our waste collection contract for the municipal units that are parties to the Municipal Joint Services Board. Municipal units are still responsible for entering into the contracts independently, but they are managed by the JSB. We have a curbside waste collection contract right now for pickup of curbside waste within the town. That's with GE's. And that contract expires March 31st, 2024, and we just did a renewal for an additional 2 years. So it expires March 31st, 2026. One of the requirements in our contract is that the successful proponent, has a depot for waste collection vehicles within the region or within a reasonable distance of the area. And that's to enable them to mobilize. And so in order to ensure that as we go out for bids for waste collection services, that there's ample time for a proponent to set up a depot and bring in waste collection vehicles, it's being suggested that the Joint Services Board go out on behalf of the units within the next couple months, seeking interest for waste collection curbside waste collection contracts for the party municipal units. The intent is to look at this as a Lunenburg County thing and have collectively all units go out together. We're just waiting for confirmation from the other municipal units that they're intending to do that. Alternatively, it would be the 3 municipal units that the Joint Services Board manages the contract for. So that's why we're coming to you early, about 12 to 18, well, almost 2 years actually, earlier before the contract expires, and asking you about service levels because we're getting ready to go out for that proposal call. The service levels that are in our contract right now are curbside, and it's household landfill waste, blue bags, paper, cardboard, organics, and those are all done on a biweekly basis. Leaf and yard waste, biweekly bulky waste is collected with the landfill waste. There's an annual metal and wood pickup in the fall, Christmas tree collection, and an annual electronic waste collection as well. Under the contract, the proponent also provides green card administration. So they store them, assemble them, they'll issue them, they'll repair them, maintain an inventory and database, but we're responsible as the town to buy them. There's a route supervisor that's also provided under the contract who responds to issues along the collection route. There is curbside waste inspection and rejection, a hotline, and as I indicated, a requirement to have an office and a vehicle depot located within the region. And there is a requirement that the collection vehicles are not older than 2 years at the start of the contract and not exceed 7 years during the term of the contract. So they have to have a relatively new fleet for providing the service. Over the past few years, in terms of service levels and expectations of the town, there have been some matters that have arisen, or certainly some conversations that have happened amongst council and the Joint Services Board that when being asked to consider service levels, these are just reminders that these came up over the past few years. One was a request to determine what would be required or what it would cost to have the biweekly organic collection. We go to weekly during the summer to have that extended. So right now it goes from July 1st to September 30th. And the question was posed, and whether, I'm not too sure if it's still an interest of council or not, but there was a question posed by a councillor previously about what would it entail or what would it cost to have that start earlier, say June 1st, and end later, the end of October. So that's one thing that's come up. The other is a discussion around the 3-cart system. So that's been raised in the past, where we would have a black cart, blue cart, and an organic cart. This would require the agreement of the other units, as it would involve modifications to the collection vehicles. Right now, they're just designed to have the organic carts, and it's a lift that an individual has to go out and put it on to have it emptied into the back of the truck. So to have it done just for the town of Bridgewater would be costly, because that would mean that fleet would be dedicated to the town. And then there's a special storm debris cleanup that has arisen over the last few years because of tropical storms or flooding, those types of things, where we don't have a price specified in the contract, and those prices are negotiated at the time of request. So those are some examples of service level, I guess, discussions or desired changes that have been brought up in the past. I'm not too sure, as I indicated, whether or not they still remain a desire of council. The other is the term of contract, and so through some research that the Joint Services Board staff have done, they've determined that best practice is a 5-year contract with an option for a 2-year renewal. That enables the collection vehicles, they typically have a 5 to 7-year life, and it enables the hauler to get the most out of those vehicles as opposed to a 4-year contract. So they're suggesting we consider looking at a change in the term and have it go from 4 to 5 with the 2-year renewal. Right now it's 4 with the 2-year renewal. It's recommended that for those service levels that are not deemed essential, but you're curious how much would it cost if we extended, say, weekly organic collection, that we would request that as a provisional item. That way it's not, once you go ask for it, it becomes contractual, but if you put it as provisional, then they know that we may or may not opt for that service based on the price. So that is what's before council right now, is to essentially ask if you wish to see any changes to the service level of your waste collection contract, and then we'll provide that back to the Joint Services Board, and as they help them prepare for going out for a proposal call.
All right, questions from members of council on this very exciting topic? Councilor McDonald.
I was a little bit curious with some of the increases in the service level that have been more recent, like the biweekly bulky waste pickup. Is it possible to get some feedback on how much that has been used or not been used?
We can provide, they could give us tonnage numbers perhaps. That would indicate what the difference was with this contract versus previous contracts we've had.
Right.
Yeah, but it has eliminated we used to do a spring and fall cleanup.
Right.
And so this gives residents the option to not have to store items, but they can put it out every 2 weeks. So that was the intent, but I can ask for the data to give you an idea of volumes.
Maybe kind of looking at how much it was used in comparison to the old way and the cost difference between the two. I can't recall it at all.
I know that the hauler said it was more expensive to do the overall to do the fall and spring.
Right.
Yeah.
But
and it was more expensive at the site too, because we had to manage that waste coming in along with curbside waste.
Okay. Yeah. Well, then I don't need that information. That's enough.
I mean, for me, I've raised the 3-cart item for a long time. So we have green carts. So I've raised, like other jurisdictions, having a blue cart, a green cart, and then a black cart. The information I've received in asking, again, like other jurisdictions that have moved to this, is it does save in the long run, because the truck is then just manned with one person, not 2. So it speeds up the process, and it's a labor saving. For an urban center, especially like ours, it helps reduce mice and rats and raccoons, because there's no bags to rip open. They're all in a cart. But I also recognize that means all these trucks have to be outfitted with a different device on them. And so certainly I'd like to see it as a provisional item, but I recognize that we're just one unit of, potentially 4 or 5 units going out for a contract, and I don't want the town to
pay for capital improvements to a private hauler if it's just going to be for us, but I would think that they would see the benefit of it as well, but looking at it a little bit more selfishly, I do see it as a rodent reduction opportunity. So that was the one that I raised, but again, it's going to come down to its cost effectiveness. I know that Councillor Caldwell had raised, he had received some feedback from folks looking to extend the organics pickup to weekly for a longer time, but I don't know if anyone else has received any calls. I haven't received any calls about that. It'll be interesting to hear from our partners if they are as well.
They don't do weekly. I don't know if
Just
Mahone Bay
does, I think.
Yeah,
Mahone
Mahone Bay, yeah.
No, Mahone Bay does in the summer.
I don't know.
Summer, yes.
Yeah.
Sorry.
But they do in the same timeline as us do?
I'm not too
Okay.
sure.
Okay. Any other
Just
questions? Yes,
Yeah,
Deputy
quick
Mayor.
comment, say, I know the weekly organic in the summer has been very positive from residents.
Mhm.
Just to, especially when the heat and everything and eliminates odors and
Yeah.
just, again, as you mentioned about rodents, so yeah, I'm all in favor of the weekly organic pickup, to continue.
Yeah, so when we say maintaining current level of service, it
Yeah.
is to maintain that,
Yeah.
the way
Yeah.
we have it now,
Yeah.
which is weekly in the summer. Okay. Any other thoughts on this, Councillor Thorburn?
Yeah, I'd like to see the metal and wood twice a year. I got stuff laying around for a year before it can be picked up. I don't have a truck that I can take it, so it just gets piled down in the back of the shed and lays there for, could lay there for 11 months, because they only come once.
Because bulky items can go out every
Okay.
other week, right? But they're size limited.
But you
Yeah,
can't put wood
metal
on
in
metal.
wood.
Right, they
Yeah.
have to, right.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's not a big deal.
No, but you're not the only person, so.
No.
it's-
That's why I brought it up.
I hear notes being taken to my.
I'm going to get confirmation before we stop this topic.
Yeah. Yeah. Other thoughts? Are you?
Okay, so, just confirmation, because we will end up putting them as provisional items, assuming that the other, units are on site. So what I'm hearing is if the other units are agreeable, the 3-cart.
I've just raised this myself. I know that around MJSB, I think we saw the benefits around the Bridgewater members, and I felt like there was a little bit of shift from some of the other members on its value, but we haven't, full disclosure, we haven't had a full discussion as council as that, so before we throw it in as a provisional item, we should probably maybe even hear from Leslie to.
So they,
Sorry, no, go ahead.
no, I was just going to say, there is somewhat of a timeline, because they want to be able to enable it. They want to entice multiple bids.
Right.
Right? And so the further this goes out, the harder it is for a proponent to mobilize. So that's part of it. So allowing that lead time of up to 18 months by the time this gets out, and then the contracts come back. So it's fairly tight in terms of being able to explore service levels.
Well, we did, yes.
I guess my point is, it's just provisional, and similar to
Yeah.
Councillor Thorburns' request, it's just provisional, so
Right.
it doesn't mean you have to accept it. You can evaluate the cost when
Yeah.
it comes in, and we would probably have that discussion, obviously, when that does happen, correct?
Yeah, I think I would talk to them to see if we could have it written as provisional, not mandatory to bid on, because
Sure,
it may
sure,
it may
sure. Might
preclude
exclude
someone
others.
from bidding
Yeah,
altogether,
certainly.
right?
Yep.
Yeah.
That
Okay.
makes me much more comfortable.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's.
There's a lot of unknowns in that.
Yeah. And the other I heard was a second metal and wood pickup.
If it's not too expensive.
Biennial?
Well, it'd be provisional.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so again, explore it.
So one in the spring, one in the fall type
Yeah.
thing, yeah. Okay.
I mean, if you did your metal and wood pickup at the, late fall, maybe capturing the end of hurricane season, you might be able to deal with it instead of having to add a storm debris cleanup. We could just
Yeah.
You know, people, if it wasn't, not saying we wouldn't have a storm debris cleanup, but if it was not a major event and there was just things that could wait a week or two, might be able to, then it might be a little bit more cost neutral, but these are provisional items, and they're items we can deal with later, discuss it at the MJSB as well.
Yeah.
Okay, any other items?
Would you like a motion?
Yes, please.
I move that town council for the town of Bridgewater endorse the recommendation of staff with respect to the service levels for the 2026 waste collection contract request for proposals by, 1, maintain the current level of service at a minimum, and 2, requiring a new term of the contract to reflect a 5-year term with a 2-year option to renew.
Thank you. Seconded by Councillor Thorburn.
Do we want to include in there in that we seek pricing for the provisional items of the 3-cart and the additional wood and metal pickup?
Certainly.
Okay.
Okay,
For that.
with that amendment, and you're good with that? Okay, move and seconded.
I think.
Yeah.
Just like that.
All right, all those in favor? Those opposed, motion is carried. Thank you. And then we have MJSB this week, where we will discuss this further. Perfect, and we are down to 2024-25 budget. Super exciting. So we have a bunch of staff here, and we'll kind of reset a little bit. I know we're going to thank you when we're done the budget, but of course, a huge thank you to Kim and all her finance team and our senior management team for all their work. I know budget is never easy. You know, I've mentioned this a few times. Public are well aware we can't run deficits like other orders of government. Yet our citizens ask us to run as lean as we can so that we're not posting giant surpluses all the time, because, you know, if you do that over and over and over again, then you're probably overtaxing your citizens. So I know that, you know, people, when we had Talk Bridgewater, I know certainly at the mall, Councillor Conklin and I we were busy. We had quite a few people. Number one question was, actually, sometimes it wasn't even a question, it was just, please tell me the tax rate's not changing. And then when we said, the goal this year is not to change the tax rate, they walked away. That was easy. But that was definitely the number one question. But the rest of it was having discussions and explaining, you know, yes, budget's growing, but the infrastructure. And I think once we had the opportunity to explain the challenges with our infrastructure and the impact on the budget, they seem to understand that where the pressures are. So that was my long-winded preamble as I was waiting for you to all get ready. So I will turn it over to...
I'll start.
You're going to start? Turn it over to CAO for this. Yeah.
Here we go. Okay. So everyone has three documents actually included with the agenda. You have the actual budget document in a PDF format, and that budget document you should be familiar with its format now. It provides an overview. We review the operating budget through that document, and the capital budget is also provided in that document. There's also information on our debt and our operating reserves and our capital reserves as well. And just as a refresher, the budget's always shown as we have last year's budget, and that budget would show you kind of the budget as well as the projected. And then for the 24-25 fiscal year, we show the adjusted baseline, which is the column that is, if you did nothing new, this is what your core would look like. And then we show you what's new, so the additions, what's coming into the budget, and then the deletions are normally those one-offs, those things that we did last year that were the one-time deals, they're coming out, we pull them out, or it could be a reduction in service or that type of thing that would be shown in that to get you to your proposed budget, which would be your baseline, adjusted baseline with adding your additions and taking out your deletions. So that's kind of the format. This year's operating budget is $31.9 million. It's an 11% increase over last year. We will go over what those significant increases are in our budget to the baseline, as well as what's the additions that would contribute to that increase. The capital budget is $8,356,000. Council received their first presentation of the capital budget in January. And at that time, we also had a spreadsheet that showed the capital carry forwards, which were totaled $33.9 million. So that's not all happening this year. Those are projects that have been occurring over the past few years, and we carry the total dollar value forward until the project's completed. So I believe over half have been completed. So you'll see that also in your capital budget. The operating and capital budget are supported with a tax rate that remains the same as last year. So $1.85 per $100 of residential assessment. And the commercial tax rate is proposed to remain the same this year as well at $4.07 per 100. And then, of course, we have the LCLC special purpose tax at 6 cents per 100, and I believe that is projected to end in 2026, 27, 27, 28, 27, 28. Wastewater rate. We've had some preliminary discussions with council with respect to the wastewater rate. And the wastewater rate is proposed to see some increases. Residential is at $5.18 and $4.66 per additional dwelling unit. So we'll go over this in more detail a little further on in the presentation, but just to show you that the additional dwelling unit is increasing, and that's to be, I believe, 90% of the residential. Hotels remain at $1,109 plus $100 per guest unit. Hospitals are increasing to $10,000 plus $100 per patient bed. Large industrial is increasing from the $1,000 to be more reflective of consumption, and that is $20,000. And educational, large grocery, car wash are $4,000, are being proposed to be that. And commercial and other remain at $1,109 plus $998 per additional user. So through this budget, all of council's strategic priorities as proposed and approved earlier in the fiscal year are being implemented. Some of the budget highlights with respect to community prosperity, Exit 12A and the interchange, business park expansion is a big component. It's a big component of our capital budget, so there's a total of $16 million shown in the budget either as a carry forward or as money in this fiscal year. So there's $5 million proposed in the 24-25, and that is to see the completion of the infrastructure. That will open up the 125 acres of town-owned land north of the 103 for the business park. So that's sewer, roads, water, sidewalk across the interchange, stormwater management, and some contaminated soil that we're addressing as well. There's the development plan and marketing sales prep. There's funds in the budget to support that at Exit 12A. And we're also proposing funds that would enable us to do a clean fuel feasibility assessment, all with the aim of looking at how we can either support businesses as they transition to clean fuel within our business industrial park, or how we can incorporate that type of technology within our park itself. I would note that while there's $150,000 in the budget for that, our net is $23,000 as we've sourced grants to offset that cost. We're continuing investments in infrastructure that's required to support growth. In our budget, there is $5.1 million in this fiscal year proposed for wastewater upgrades, and that's to help us as we move towards meeting the requirements of no overflows and to address the undercapacity issue that we have within our wastewater system. Road upgrades, this year there's $920,000 for road upgrades, so that's our pavement management program that we have on an annual basis. And it also includes some paving on Empire, not all of Empire, just a portion of Empire from York
to Hillcrest.
Hillcrest, yeah, and then Pearl Street. And that's to finish off the unpaved portion of Pearl Street. Sidewalks, there's $140,000 in our capital budget for sidewalk improvements. And we continue to look at investment attraction and marketing, so we have some funds proposed there to support that. The Bridgewater, the BMA, which we have to come up with a new name for, we're continuing to work on the redevelopment of that. And this year there's $90,000 for the exterior of the building to be improved. And Energized Bridgewater continues this year. and we have $1.62 million in our operating budget for that, and that is funded through a grant that we received to offset that cost. And we have 2 more years of that. It expires March 31st, 2026. Placemaking and quality of life. We have the continuation of funding the accessibility action plan and the coordinator at $18,000. Active transportation plan, we're looking at the multimodal trail on High Street this year, so finalizing that. Investment in our recreational opportunities. So our operating budget has $1.55 million that we invest in recreational facilities within the town. So that's the LCLC, parks, and our outdoor pool. The housing action plan, we will be implementing that this year. While not successful in funding opportunities there, we do have a backup plan for how we can implement that. May take us a little longer, but we're still proposing that be implemented. Again, reducing energy poverty with Energize Bridgewater at $1.62 million. And this year we will start the anti-racism, inclusion, and diversity work. And we have $20,000 within our budget this year to participate in a regional coordinator that will work with all the municipal units within Lunenburg County. The museum is proposed to have an operating grant of $203,000. And we continue to invest in transit. Our net is $248,000, so that's after we take off our revenue. So gross, it's $320,000. We have a number of community events that we're supporting this year. So there's $92,700 in our budget combined for community events, and that includes Canada Day, Christmas on the Lehave, Harvest Moon Festival, and Music on the Riverbank. This year is Bridgewater's 125th, and there is $62,000 in our operating budget to support that. And we do have some grants that helps offset that, so $38,000 net. We do support nonprofit organizations, and there's $210,000 in our operating budget for that support. And that comes in the form of grants to organizations, sponsorships, as well as tax exemptions. So those all total $210,000. And low-income property tax exemption is $70,000. And we support Pro Kids in this budget as well with $20,000, so a slight increase from last year. So the town contributes $11,500, and then the rest is made up through donations. In terms of placemaking and quality of life continued, in the budget you'll see that there is $30,000 proposed for the community navigator to do some physician recruitment initiatives, and we'll note that that's actually a net to us of zero. We have a grant that offsets that 100%. So while you'll see the expense, there's a revenue that comes in to offset that. Investment in emergency response, the town invests $1.8 million for fire services. This year you'll see in the budget that there is, I believe it's $55,000 in total for fire service review. I know it says 50. Police protection, the net is $4.3 million. In emergency response, $52,000 for REMO, and that's up from last year by $29,000, and that's to add our share of the cost of additional resources. And this year, in an attempt to address the hemlock woolly adelgid, we have a park preservation project, and that is $158,109, and that was something that council had given pre-budget approval for in terms of the resources to support that. In terms of ensuring fiscal responsibility, we can contribute to our reserves this year $1.32 million for wastewater reserves. So that might look like a big number in isolation of our capital budget, but we do have a significant capital obligation. I believe it's $78 million over the 10 years for wastewater. So it's important to contribute to those reserves. And so this year we'll be putting $1.32 million in there. Sourcing of grants. We have in this budget $2.8 million in capital grants for this fiscal year and $3.35 in operating grants. So those are fairly large numbers compared to previous years. Asset management, this year we will see the asset management plan and program implement it. And there's $135,000 for that, and that's been carried in the budget, I think, for a couple years. Fraud risk assessment, Kim and her team will be bringing forth some of the recommendations that came out of that and looking at implementing that plan. And there's funds for continued internal control improvements. So continuing with looking at some of the recommendations that came out of our internal control audit. Development and infrastructure charges carried over from last year, $200,000. And that is to look at the development and infrastructure charges that will help offset some of the infrastructure costs that development creates and enable us to accommodate that. And ensuring debt affordability, this year you'll see that we're proposing that we fund from operating $2.3 million of capital. So that means borrowing less. And that's important because that does impact our debt service ratio in a positive way by not having to borrow that. So normally I think it's around 1.1, 1.2, and this year we're proposing that it be at 2.3. And you'll see by looking at our 10-year capital plan that we have a number of aggressive, I guess, years for capital projects, all related to wastewater primarily. Therefore, there will be a larger borrowing requirements in future years. So it's important to lessen the borrowing now. In terms of organizational excellence, one of the recommendations that came out of the internal control audit that the town had done maybe 4 years ago, was a time and attendance. And that was one where we would automate that and take out the human error and the number of hands that have to touch time cards. So that's looking at implementation of software that would automate that process for us. And I think Kim kind of explained it well, that we're a small town with big city requirements when it comes to time and attendance, given that we have the police and all of the different categories and time requirements there, and Public Works and a number of other work divisions that have different ways of tracking time and accounting for time. So that's $130,000 to look at implementing that. Budgeting software, so we do a great job at a 10-year capital plan, and this budgeting software will help Kim and her team with preparing annual budgets, but also looking at more long-range operating budgets as well. So matching our operating with our capital in a way so that we can take a longer look into the future. Regional building inspection services, so we have been reviewing the agreement, and there's a plan to transition. So there is $85,000 to transition to the regional building inspection services, and that's primarily for software, permit tracking software, as well as scanning of our files. And data governance and privacy management, we're $140,000. So $50,000 of that is IT support through the Joint Services Board, and then there's labor as we create a position to implement that. And we are also looking at recruitment and retention and what we can do there to strengthen that. So there's some funds for strategy implementation. And then per council's salary admin policy, every 4 years there's a remuneration review. So there's funds to do that. It wouldn't include implementation. That would be in a following year subject to council's approval. So this is just a quick roll up of your budget to show you a comparison to last year. And as indicated, there is a 11% increase in gross expenditures. Your non-tax revenue has increased as well by 10%, and those include things such as grants, sales of service, interest, anything that's not generated from the tax rate. And then you have tax revenue that's increased as well. And as I say, that's just a high-level look, and as you can see, the balance at the end of the day is zero because we are required to deliver a balanced budget. So I'll hand it over to Kim.
I can probably use the arrows. All right, so I'm just going to go into some more on the specifics that are in the budget, and then some of the other directors are going to speak to their budgets as well. But this graph just gives you an idea of kind of where the what makes up the expenditures. So you can see the light gray is police, and that's 18.68, so that's a large portion of our operating budget. And then the brown one towards the bottom with wastewater being 10.71, being kind of our more significant portions. And so it just divides that up, just a different way to look at some of the different departments and functions of the town as far as expenditures go. So same idea, so kind of giving you an idea of the revenue distribution. And while we talk about tax rates and things like that and keeping it the same, this gives you an idea that of all our revenue sources, tax revenue makes up 83% of our sources of revenue. We don't have a lot of outside sources of revenue. Interest on our bank balances and things like that, you can see here. So just gives you an idea that we are very reliant on our tax rate as far as funding our expenditures. The next one that we kind of look at is mandatory contributions. So these are things that we don't calculate, but we have to contribute to. And so the first two, correctional services and regional housing, you'll see that the balances are zero this year. So as part of the restructuring of the service exchange agreement with the province, the town is no longer required to contribute to correctional services or regional housing. They are covered now by the province. So that saved us $236,000. Using that all up is education contribution, which is increased by $241,000. And so again, the province sets an education rate that's based on our uniform assessment times the rate. So just the 10% increase in our uniform assessment has resulted in us having to contribute an extra $241,000 to the school board. And so that they kind of even each other out, but at the same time we would have owed, I expect regional housing was $100,000 last year, would have been, those costs would have escalated for this year as well. In addition, the Regional Library Board, our contribution is the same at $66,500, and assessment services estimate is a 1% increase to $121,000. And so that's our contribution for PVSC. So overall, those mandatory contributions are just increasing around $6,000. To give you an idea of some of, we go into detail and talk shortly about all the additions and deletions in service level, but also there's things that change in the baseline numbers. So I just wanted to give you an overview of those because they're not increase in level of service, they're just things that either cost more or saving us a bit more. So transfer to wastewater reserves, Tammy mentioned earlier, we're putting $1.3 million into wastewater reserves. And that's a result of increasing those rates because we know the debt is imminent and getting those rates where they need to be to afford the debt repayment, but also putting some money in the reserve for emergencies when tenders come in over budget, things like that, that we've had to use that wastewater reserve for in the past. So there's just an increase over last year of about $500,000 going in that reserve. Transfer to general capital fund, again, so that kind of capital out of operating was only $1,040,000 last year, which is about $200,000 less than kind of the 1.2 goal. But last year, in order to balance the budget, I think we had reduced it down to $1,040,000. So it's going back up to about the 1.2 mark. Plus, we have an addition that's kind of a one-time where we are recommending funding even more capital from operating. But this is just kind of to give you an idea of the baseline. Education contribution, which we just talked about. Fire protection rate, which is paid to the PSC, which is set by the UARB. So that's $88,216 more than it was in last year's baseline. The garbage contract, which Tammy was talking about in an earlier presentation, increased by 18%. So that's added an extra $65,000 to the budget. The museum baseline has increased by $35,000, bringing that one up, I think Tammy mentioned in her presentation, to about $203,000. MJSB waste site expenditures. For the most part, that relates to increased tipping fees for the municipal units. So our increase as a result of that is about $23,000. So that's outside of the garbage collection contract. This is the actual tipping fees at the waste site. The police commission baseline budget increased by $133,000. We have some savings, so we reduced the baseline for heating fuel at the wastewater treatment plant by almost $40,000. There was a parking study in the budget in the prior year, so that's reduced the baseline by that $45,000. A reduction in debenture interest. Transfer to operating reserve. So last year there was a transfer to the reserve of the 23-24 surplus budgeted, but this year we're not, we don't have that excess or anticipated surplus for 24-25. The Municipal Joint Services Board, our contribution based on HR costs is actually going down by $6,700 as a result of a change in the funding agreement or the funding formula. However, on the IT side, we're actually going up by $122,000 as a result of changes in the funding formula. I think we'll look at the LCLC in a bit, but the recommendation or the request is an increase in the capital grant of $134,000 over the prior year, and an increase of $53,000 in the operating budget. And then the last item is salary and benefits that relates to not police, but CUPE and non-union, including changes to benefit plans and so on. So that increase for steps, for CPI adjustments and so on is $484,000. So this just gives you an idea of kind of the numbers. So last year, the operating budget being 28 million, this year's, or 28.8. This year's baseline is 29.5, with 3 million of additions, 614,000 of deletions for a revised baseline, or a revised total budget of $31.9 million for 24-25. So the next number of slides really gets into the specific additions and deletions of each department. And so the directors and CAO will speak to those.
Okay. So under admin, in terms of revenues, as indicated, there's $24,000 in a grant to help offset some of the $62,000 that we have for the Town of Bridgewater 125 celebrations. And then we have $171,000 in other grants, and that is a small CanX grant. There is the $33,000 for the recruitment, not physician recruitment work, and then the $135,000 for the clean fuels funding for that program we were doing there. So that's a total of $195,000 in revenue. And then in expenses, in terms of additions, I believe the total is $552,000. So we'll go over what those are. So under community navigation, there's $10,000 proposed for community navigation, and that's to enable the preparation of some materials to help support Rebecca and the work that she does there. There's a contingency of $66,000, so that's for unknowns. It's not spent unless there's a need to. Community events, Harvest Moon, $15,000, and we had that last year, but it's not part of our baseline, but it's proposed that probably we'll start seeing that in the following years, so we do have it shown as a reoccurring. So if it's approved this year, it's proposed that we would continue to see that event on an annual basis. Healthcare retention and recruitment, that's the $30,000, but there is a offsetting grant of $30,000. So net effect to the town, it's one time. Asset management software and consulting, that's $33,000. Professional development, that is the Michelin conference. Clean fuel feasibility assessment, then that's $135,000. So that's our cost, and as indicated, there is a grant that will be provided to offset that. Marketing and promotion, so there's $20,000 for some strategy and branding work under economic development. The municipal elections this fall, so we have to put some funds in our budget to provide for that, and that's mainly software and labor cost and some advertising, those things. And then there's some small costs to do with cell phone and hardware IT peripherals for new positions. Under emergency measures, there's $29,000, and as indicated, that's the increased cost to Remo for the additional resource, as well as a few new TMR radios. Small equipment is, again, for a new position, so desk, chair. And then consulting, there's $50,000, so there's $35,000 for salary review, and then $15,000 for recruitment and retention. So that's, and we've started some of that work with the leadership team, doing some teamwork and leadership training. Occupational health and safety, this was approved by council already with the Municipal Joint Services Board. So that's our share of an officer for occupational health and safety. And then Canada, that should be just events, TOB 125. So that's the cost for all of the events that would be supported there, and $24,000 in a grant to offset that. $25,000 for land sales and marketing, and that is to enable us to market the lands at Exit 12A as well as the lands in Glen Allen. And then the rest are just deletions for things that would have been one time last year that we've moved out.
Do you want
questions
on each
on
section?
that?
Yeah. Any questions on those? Councillor Thorburn?
It's $15,000 for Harvest Moon. Is that including the money for the fireworks that we've taken from July the 1st to put in there?
No. No, that would be just for the event, it's like the music and all that cost.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the $9,500, is that the money for those cameras that come from in reserve?
The 95.
And was paid at Cenotaph?
Oh, yeah, so that was in last year's budget,
Budget, yeah.
and we're pulling it out,
Right.
because we're all done.
It's all done?
Yeah.
I just looked at it and said, well, we can't take it out because we need them, but then I realized it was last year's budget.
Yes, it was last year's, yeah.
Great, thank you very much.
Okay.
Other questions on this section? Okay.
All right. So the museum, you want to speak to that, Pat? Okay.
Good evening. So on the revenue side for the museum this year are significant changes. We have a proposed addition for $48,000. We are currently pursuing a grant through the Library Archives of Canada and a funding program that they have. If we are successful in getting that grant, there is an attached expenditure on the other side, so you would see student wages at $58,000. So 85% of that grant would go to fund a position that would work on a digitization project over the next year for us. So at a cost of $10,000 to the town, it's a relatively good return on investment. Two deletions under revenues. One is a transfer from the operating reserve that took place last year to help offset the cost the town incurred to operate the museum. So that $18,000 is gone now. And we're also pulling out approximately $7,500 with respect to grants for summer students from federal programs. Other expenditures are smaller. Small tools and equipment is an archive digitization equipment piece to the tune of $1,600. We're also proposing $5,000 to go towards renaming and rebranding the museum. That's been part of the direction that council has given this year, and that would allow us to get a good start on future signage changes on site should we go down the path of proceeding with that. And two deletions on the expenditure side. One is the conservation project, $47,000. So you'll recall that was the artifact remediation project that we completed last year to remove mold from the collection. And we also removed $4,000 for lighting that we had proposed for the gallery space as well.
Questions on museum? All good. Thank you.
All right, my turn. All right, so just a couple of things. The first one to note, the equalization grant, which it actually, that's the name we have it in our town suite system. It's not considered that anymore. Town Foundation grant. And so as part of the service exchange that we mentioned earlier, which saw a reduction in our contribution for housing and corrections, there's an increase in our equalization grant of $222,533. So we had some cost reductions and an increase in our grant from the province. In addition to that, we're proposing to transfer funds from the operating reserve to operating of $402,000. So in the 23-24 budget, there were a number of projects in both community development and finance that were to be funded from operating. And because those projects are being carried forward, and we're suggesting that they be funded out of the reserve from the surplus from 23-24, because we've had considerable savings as a result of not getting those projects done. And that would be primarily development charges and the time and attendance software. On the expenditure side, we have an addition for contractual services, which again are the budget software that Tammy mentioned, the time and attendance software, some actuary costs that we're required to incur every 3 years as to do some calculations that are required for our financial statements, as well as some internal control procedures improvements for $10,000. And so while there are additions, there were also additions last year. They were just not completed. Staff have been working on it. We just haven't incurred any outside costs to date. We have a small amount for an addition for office equipment for chairs. We have $211,000 for recruitment. That is mostly made up of pension transition costs, finance recruitment, and any other actuary costs for consultants for the pension transition. We have, as mentioned before, we're recommending an additional $1.1 million to fund capital, and so that's noted here as an addition. And in the future, that amount is roughly what we'll see as an increase in debt, principal, and interest payments for the 25-26 budget year. So it's kind of a one-time fund capital from operating this year. Tammy mentioned we have a pretty significant $33.9 million capital carry forward. So basically, as a result of not completing those projects and having to finance them permanently through MFC debt, it actually enabled us to use the money we thought we'd need in 24-25, and instead of using it to pay principal and interest, we can actually just put it right towards capital for 24-25 to reduce our borrowing for now. And then next year, we've still kind of got that baseline there to make those debt repayments without going, how are we going to pay that extra $1 million? We kind of know it's built into the baseline of our 24-25 budget. Hopefully that makes sense to everybody. I know it's a little bit confusing, but otherwise we'd have $1 million surplus just because our principal and interest payments didn't come when we thought they would. So we're recommending fund capital with it, and then next year it's kind of exists there in our operations to make those debt payments. We have a few deletions. And that was related to the museum mold remediation mentioned by Patrick. So we saw the reduction on the museum budget. We have a small reduction in computer hardware of $1,250. We had a reduction in capital from operating. We have correction centers and regional housing deficits, which again mentioned as part of the service exchange adjustments by the province. So they just show up as deletions because they are permanently gone, and our baseline will now be 0 on those two items going forward. Not sure who's doing
Yeah,
fire.
I can do fire. Mike, please. Oh,
Sorry,
yeah.
before we go there,
Yeah.
that
sorry.
one. Sorry.
No, it's good.
Okay.
Yep.
The 1.1 million,
Mm-hmm.
so it's transferred to capital this year. Next year, it's kind of like a placeholder for next year. But
Yes.
next year, we don't have $1.1 million.
To fund extra, we have it, but we're actually going to probably use it for principal and interest payments as long as we get those capital projects done. But I did the math on roughly what the principal and interest payments will be based on that carry forward, knowing that that's our extra payments related to Exit 12A, related to all of the non-wastewater projects.
So that means that there will be less capital, $1.1 million less capital spending in next year's budget. That money will be going to debt repayment.
Yes,
Do I understand
exactly.
that?
Yeah,
Okay.
we'll be back down
Thank
to
you.
that 1.2 capital out of operating that we've kind of consistently tried to aim for.
Right, okay. Thank you.
All right, so with fire, the fire chief is in training tonight, so he will be available on April 2nd, but the changes to their budget should not come as a surprise to council. So the first one is $55,000, and that's for the underwriter study and the strategic review of fire services. So that includes the mandated every 5-year underwriters review that they do to ensure that our equipment is adequate and our service is adequate for the call volumes we have and the type of calls we have for insurance ratings and all those things. But in addition to that, we're looking at a review of the fire services to ensure that the fire services is right-sized for what the town needs in terms of projected growth and current growth in that. So we talked about composite department and a number of things like that. So that's funds to do that. And then there's some miscellaneous rescue and fire equipment. So it's kind of noted there. There's equipment for engine 1, ladder 2 equipment, rescue equipment 5, tactical equipment, and unit 7. So just a variety of smaller equipment pieces that they need. And then the deletion is equipment that they purchased last year, $39,000. So the additions are $84,000 and the deletions are $39,000.
Just the underwriter study, I'm looking at former Fire Chief Thorburn. So the underwriter study, correct me if I'm wrong, we have one of the highest with the highest rating you can get.
We have the highest rating that a volunteer department can get for a town our size.
Right, and when you tell your insurance company that, it helps your insurance
Helps your
rate.
insurance rate.
We should really be advertising that more. I know that my home insurance rate went down, but I had to let the insurance company know that we did that, that the town did that. So for all the thousands of people who are watching council right now. But that's the same study, right?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, it's mandatory that it gets done every 5 years so that you can get an update as a new equipment comes on in your manpower. And looks at response times and the condition of your equipment and the servicing of your pumps and the capacity of flows. It's a high-level overlook of everything that the fire service does to make the town safe.
Good. Tell your friends. Save some money.
Worship, Council, good evening. Not a lot of additions or in relation to the police budget. Only really two. One is the replacement of a police service dog at $12,000. Our dog is 8 years old, so it's up for replacement. The second is a new leased vehicle It did well. The second is a new lease vehicle that will be on a go-forward basis. It's an additional vehicle to the fleet as we're moving one of our older vehicles into an admin vehicle to have two. The other two vehicles are the other two additions are replacement or operating budgets on replacement of capital items, and you'll see them come off in the deletions. There were some couple of deletions as a result of collective bargaining and negotiations, acting pay and shift differential. There was an older car, rather than go for surplus, it was moved over to the senior safety position. Her vehicle was 2012, so hers has been moved back to us and has gone for surplus to be sold. And the other two vehicles are the replacement of a marked vehicle and a operating of a leased vehicle. And small equipment, there was the removal of $30,000. That was a one-time cost last year in our operating budget to create and set up our ident section, which is up and running functionally. So we had an addition of $23,000 and a deletion of $44,000.
Questions of the chief? Someone's going to ask if the chief gets to 8 years old, do we?
58.
So what happens to the existing police dog? Is somebody going to make a nice home for him?
Yeah, so what'll happen is his handler will have the first opportunity to keep the dog as a pet. It's
Right.
used to the family. In turn, he will also be the handler for the dog. We've invested a number of hours and time in training. Training will go faster with the second dog. We're following HRP's policy on canine. They're our trainers and provide the training to us free of charge. So most of their members get 2 dogs and then they rotate out. So we will do the same. You know, for instance, our dog is 8 years. The same dog purchased in there. They only receive 6 years out of theirs because it's more active and so on. So he will be the first. If not, then it'll be housed internally, and then we'll go from there. I'm sure somebody will take him before he goes anywhere else.
Other questions of the chief?
Oh, beautiful.
So far, so good. Thank you.
Thanks, Wendy.
If you don't mind, I'll sit down because I have a few slides.
No, that's good. Just
And
pull that.
usually I try to run.
Pull that microphone towards you.
Close. Wow. Yeah, so in terms of the engineering additions, with respect to the first slide, so we have a number of repairs for the town hall with respect to some boiler repairs, some exterior trim. Also, we've had a consistent sewer connection problem within the back parking lot that we do need to fix. And then there's been some ongoing discussion over the past year with improving our entrance on Pleasant Street with respect to the sidewalk and addition of a bike rack. Our facility maintenance supervisor has to manage a number of routine and non-routine tasks for the number of facilities that he has to manage. So he's requested the assistance of a computer maintenance management software, which has been an addition. Then a couple of the next one is to do with the new engineering the engineering truck for the supervisor. And that's will be in place, and then we need that maintenance every year. We have some lift gates that we usually, so it's kind of a reoccurring, we buy a new lift gate every year for one of the trucks, but in this case it's tagged to the 2019 truck. We are looking to purchase a new light board for one of our vehicles. Then we have some ongoing or reoccurring maintenance accounts for the new Ford Lightning, the new plate tamper, the 2 new 5-ton trucks, which we hope to come here in spring, the new backhoe, which we're still in the process of procuring. Then we have some improvements that specific improvements that we'd like to do along LaHaye Street in Alexandra, related to stormwater, we hope. Then we have some deletions with respect to phones, either some peripherals for computers, and this year we're not planning to do any traffic counts, so we did eliminate that this year. I'm not sure who controls the slides. Oh. So, there's the next one. Okay. I'll move on to it because my slide didn't change. Thanks. So then small
Pull
tools.
your computer to the side because the screen behind your computer has this.
Oh.
No, they're not working.
Oh, yes.
It's over here.
Oh, okay, yeah. Public Works purchase, so really we have it in 2 lines. It's the removal, deletion of fencing, but we have the addition of fencing just under small tools. We're seeing a reduction in that cost. We still plan to purchase safety fencing to coordinate off some of our work sites because we are constantly working around in a public environment, so we need to close those sites off. Power tools, the facilities department does need a replacement or additional tools each year. And at the Public Works Garage, we have some outstanding work with respect to the security system for the inventory shed, I call it, the finalization of the pipe rack, and then parking lot improvements, which really tagged to the St. Philip Street project. So we want to get our entrance with a better flow through, so it's best to tag that at the time when we're doing the St. Philip Street repairs. So I think that covers engineering public works. Maybe I should stop in case.
Mike, sorry, Councilor Conklin.
So for the temporary lights on King Street, 80,000.
Did I miss that?
No, you mentioned.
Oh, I did miss that, I'm sorry.
Oh, maybe you did miss it, sorry.
No.
Year 1 of 2, so that means we'd be looking at another 80,000 next year, is that what you mean?
So when I did present the options to council, I believe we were at the Bridgewater Fire Hall then, the anticipation, we anticipated that would only be 1 year. So some conversations with the province, they at this point plan to do Venus Bridge or Wallsbrook Bridge, not this year, but the following year. So we anticipate for 2 years, yes, at this time.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry for skipping that, actually, that was quite significant to skip.
So just because I know I had this question, and I think lots of people have this question, why it takes so long, but it does, some of that answer is if you got to go back to July 22nd of last year, and the number of bridges across the province that were either wiped out or are in the same condition that this one is in. So some of those are higher priority, because while the pedestrian section is closed, the traffic section isn't closed, right? We've closed it to have a safe access for pedestrians to walk. That's why those lights are there. So that was my question. Why doesn't the province move faster? And the answer from the province was nothing. Their bridge is okay. It needs to be replaced in 2 years. We've reduced the lanes for the safety of pedestrians. So just a little bit of information for the general public and a bit of a reminder that, hundreds of bridges across the province were impacted in various degrees from that storm. So it's on the list, but it's going to be a couple of years.
So under wastewater, actually moves right into the electrical service. We do have because of the bridge and the pedestrian bridge being, I guess, compromised, and the services of both water and sewer were attached to that pedestrian bridge, we did have to install a temporary pump station on the north side of that existing pedestrian bridge, so there is increased power for that temporary pump station. Sorry. We do have IT upgrades for the wastewater treatment plant from an operation maintenance to ensure we can get Wi-Fi throughout the plant, but that's also a safety concern for staff as well. And then we have the deletions because we completed the Pump Station 3 legal survey, as well as the upgrades for the wastewater treatment plant. With respect to transit, so really this is an in and out, so we have a 10-year bus stop improvement plan, so we were able to complete some of those improvements, or those improvements are tagged to a future capital project, so then we have those accounts updated for other bus stop improvements that we plan to do. So I know that sometimes I reference the location or the stops, but they are referenced back to the 10-year capital plan for just the bus stops themselves. So not a lot of money, but just overall, when we speak to capital, there is a plan to install 2 bus shelters this year, which is under the capital program. Most of this money is related to creating landing pads and tactile surfaces for accessibility, kind of making that space a little bit more whole when it comes to the bus stop. And it's not just a sign, but actually a place where the ramp can be laid down and people can access it without stepping down on the curb and back up into the bus. And then parking lots. In my time, we've continued to annually invest about $10,000 into the town center parking lot to rate pay portions of it at a time. That will continue. The focus this past year has been on improving the aesthetics with the addition of the kiosk, but also some work up above. And so we're likely going to move to the upper parking lot because it is in the worst condition. Then we have the North Parkade. So back before I started, I think in 2018-19, we did have it assessed. There is an annual maintenance program with that. Staff plan to continue or try to continue with that maintenance program, but this year have the parkade reassessed because it has been now 5 years since it has been last assessed, and it should be done so, which is amazing.
Time flies.
With respect to parks, I didn't know if there are any questions. So.
Yep, no?
Park additions, so certainly the new equipment that we purchased, creating a new maintenance account for that, as well as the signage program. We're going to invest in Pinecrest Park, new sign there. And a lot of the deletions come with either a water lot has been surveyed, or the removal of signs that either completed or now we're moving in a different direction. And then playground work that was completed, or tires or cell phones that have been purchased, or doggy do stations. So they've been removed. And then we're on to cemetery. Unless there's no questions, of course.
Any questions on those?
No. Well, maybe I didn't need to sit down. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt.
Right. So I will, cemetery is a joint project between engineering and community development, and this is, there you go. Now I see what you were saying, Matt, about the challenge here of being in two places at once. So we have applied for, and actually we have heard that we've received the Co-op Education Incentive Grant for a student to do a mapping project. So we've been approved for that revenue. The requirement is now to hire somebody that meets the requirements of the grant. And so then you'll see the addition for the mapping and records management project associated with the cemetery, which is an ongoing, we've been trying to address it through side of desk, which never works. So we're trying to do a concerted effort to get the cemetery mapped. Any questions on that? Excellent. Okay. So with the planning budget area, we are removing some grants that we had received in previous year. So those are not recurring, including the grant related to the Municipal Physical Activity Leadership Program, but that is, we're removing it from the planning accountability and moving it over into the recreation accountability, where the primary responsibility for that program resides. So that's not a removal from the budget entirely, just moving to a different spot. In terms of the expenditures, the big ones you'll notice, and Kim had already discussed this with you, that there were several large projects that were not able to be initiated or completed within this current fiscal year, and so we're rebudgeting for them. So they're continuing to show up as an addition because they are not a long-term project, not expected to stay. And so there's the second phase of flood risk. So we removed half of the flood risk work, so $50,000, which is grant funded. We're rebudgeting the development charges. This also includes, sorry, that doesn't include the summer student and miscellaneous. That's included in the overall budget area. Sorry, I had some other notes that were looking different than in the presentation. And then there's an addition of $20,000 for a greenhouse gas inventory. We need to redo our greenhouse gas inventory per the Community Energy Investment Plan. So that's actually an item that will be cost shared with the Energize Bridgewater program. So $20,000 out of planning and $15,000 in the Energize program. And we also have a special project under the Building and Fire Inspection Services for records management and permit tracking software and record scanning as we move into the regional service. And there's just a few small deletions related to a grant that we're no longer, we've completed for placemaking, as well as some purchase of some GIS extensions that were completed in this past fiscal year. Any questions on planning? Excellent. Moving into recreation. This is where you'll see a very large change related to the Hemlock Woolly Adelgid, Bridgewater's Hemlock Preservation Project. So we have applied for funding, and should we receive that funding, we should be receiving $134,000 for this next fiscal year related to the grant. We also have already received approval for additional grants, such as the Municipal Physical Activity Leadership for another year, as well as a grant from the Toronto-Dominion Friends of the Environment Foundation for some pollinator-related workshops, and a carryover from the Community Health Board grant. Both of those latter two grants are related to the Community Gardens program. You'll note there's both an addition and a deletion in revenue and expenditures. Deletions from both the revenue and the expenditure related to the Kids Triathlon. That much beloved program sort of died during COVID, and we've not been able to resuscitate it due to a sort of an ongoing challenge in recruitment of volunteers through the triathlon, Bridgewater Triathlon Club. So we were unable to resuscitate it, and we've tried a few different iterations, but it just didn't work, so we're letting that program go and leave the memory of it behind. It was wonderful. My kids loved it. It was super fun. But it's just too challenging for the number of volunteers required at this point. In terms of under expenditures, you'll see we broke out the projects from wages related to the Hemlock Woolly Adelgid project. And then there's some miscellaneous additional expenses related to some new equipment related to Hemlock and these grant-funded programs related to the community gardens.
Question?
No questions. Moving right along then, the pool. So you'll note there's an addition so in our partnership with the Lunenburg County Lifestyle Center, they're proposing that they do almost all of the staffing for us, and that would include adding some cleaning services, so that's an addition. Previously, that had primarily been carried out by the lifeguards on duty or others, so trying to up that level of service. As well as continuing for a second year with additional maintenance and repairs related to accessibility and safety audits that were carried out on the facility. Back to Kim.
So the pool, sorry, just with the outdoor pool, it's just same as last year. We're going to we're still partnering with the LCLC.
We are still partnering with the LCLC. We are still seeking sponsorships. We're a little delayed in getting a few of those things out. Still planning for a stellar 2024 season at the outdoor pool.
Okay, perfect.
All right, back to me. We've kind of gotten through some of the operating budget items, but this next slide is related to the operating reserve budget. So you'll see in the actual budget document itself that there's a summary of the operating reserve in there, and it actually gives you detail by reserve. But this just is to kind of give you a different look at that. So we're starting with the year with approximately $16.7 million in reserve. And that's based on what's there now and what we expect to add and take from it for the 23-24 fiscal year. So starting with $16.7 million, we're anticipating interest income of $200,000, cemetery niche sales. So currently in the capital budget for 23-24, we had a new installation there. And we did have monies in reserve for that. So the point of this is actually to take part of 25% of all the sales related to the columbarium and put it in reserve for the next time we have to purchase another one, because it was about $120,000, which is pretty significant. So this is kind of making sure we don't spend all the sales on operating the cemetery and not put aside funds for the next purchase. So that is kind of a new process for us, so we added that here, and it's also reflected in the cemetery budget. In addition to that, each year we put $21,633,000 in a reserve, because we have one debenture that has a balloon payment at the end of 15 years, so we have to make sure we have that money saved up so we don't have to refinance it. As discussed, the wastewater reserve is receiving or the wastewater operating has a surplus of $1.3 million that'll be transferred into reserve in 24-25. We will be using $517,000 of the existing wastewater reserve to fund capital projects either that are in the carry forward listing or in the 24-25 capital budget. The police reserve, as you know, each year $200,000 is expected to go in from police operating as part of their operations, putting it in reserve. However, there were police radios in the 23-24 capital budget which haven't arrived yet, as far as I know. And so now we have to pay for those next year out of the reserve. And they were being paid out of operating. So what'll happen in 23-24, there'll be an extra $85,000 goes into the reserve from police operations, and then we'll take it out next year. In addition to that, so capital projects carry forward. I always have a little, when we have capital from operating, I still, because we don't always finish those capital projects and they end up on the capital carry forward list, what I do is I make sure I put that money in the reserve. So even though we didn't finish the project, I make sure it's in the reserve because it was capital out of operating, so we just move it from operating to reserve and then fund the capital in the year we actually complete the projects. So that is about $412,000 based on estimates right now, depending on how far we get along in our carry forwards. The business park expansion capital, so we're anticipating using $3.5 million of the business park reserve to fund the 12A project. Wastewater betterment, so there's a calculation in the wastewater budget. Basically, council approved a couple years ago a wastewater betterment charge, which we estimate how much of that we'll be collecting and put that in reserve. And then the next line down, we anticipate to use $34,666 of that in the capital budget. The undesignated operating reserve, so when we have a surplus or we transfer money to the reserve that isn't earmarked for something in particular, we put it in an undesignated reserve and we can use that as needed. Part of the use of that right now is anticipated to be some of the operating items, but in addition to that, the water tower contribution is part of what's making up the $1.2 million. Still a bit of COVID safe restart funding that we've been saving for the time and attendance software. A little bit of transit reserve being used for bus stops. Smart cities, there's kind of a timing difference between when we receive the grants and when we've been using them. So we've actually been not spending it as fast as it had been coming in. We knew there would be a timing issue, so we've been putting that monies aside in the Smart Cities Reserve and are anticipating to use $606,000 of that to fund the Smart Cities operating for 24-25. And then the Special Purpose Tax Reserve transfer of $138,000. What's actually happening currently is that we're collecting more in special purpose tax at the 6 cents than we need to pay the principal and interest payments to the LCLC. So we're going to put that $138,000 in reserve. And that's why when we talk about the date that last year of the 6 cents to be collected being 27-28, is because we're now able to put monies aside to take years off of that. So the money will be sitting, and we'll be able to stop collecting the last year, 27-28, that's the last year we'll collect the 6 cents, but we'll have the money in reserve to keep making those payments to the LCLC on that debenture. So that's a positive thing, so we can set that monies aside. So that's kind of what's coming in and out of the operating reserve. Again, the actual budget document, you can see by reserve what the balance is opening, what we're anticipating to use, these numbers, and then the final ending balance of $12.2 million. So still quite a healthy amount in our operating reserve. For the capital reserve, at the beginning of the fiscal year, we're expecting about $3.8 million in there. We always estimate gas tax at $675,000. Sometimes it comes a little higher, a little lower. And then we're anticipating to use just over $1 million of the capital reserves, most of that being gas tax monies. We're anticipating to earn some interest income on the capital reserve. which leaves us with a balance of 3.5 million. In the past, we used to borrow from ourselves, borrow from our capital reserve, so there's 89,800 still outstanding in those loans that are paid back on an annual basis, leaving $3.4 million available in the capital reserve. Any questions on the reserves budgets?
Questions?
I know it's a lot of ins and outs and a lot of information.
Councillor Conklin.
How are we coming up with that interest income projection?
It's a bit low. So I'll just take us back in history about 2 years. So previous to 2 years ago, when we amended our reserve policies, which weren't very clear. In the past, all of the interest income just went to operating, and we used it for the town operating budget. So a couple of years ago, when we changed our reserve policies, we actually said that unless council decides otherwise, we have to leave the money in the reserve in which the money sits. And so that interest estimate is based on that. However, there are times during the year, such as March, where we haven't collected any tax revenue since September. Construction season's ended, so we're paying out all kinds of capital projects. So we get a little low on cash at times in our regular operating bank account. And so sometimes we have to borrow temporarily from these reserves until we get our financing in place. So for example, Exit 12A, if we're making payments of $1 million to the province as we go, but we're not financing that, or we've got Pump Station 11, which is $7 million, 90% done, we can't finance that until there's substantial completion. So a lot of times we're just we get low in our operating bank account, and we might have to borrow temporarily from here just until the next tax bill, till we get those debentures in place and so on. So I just don't like to estimate the interest to be too high, because as we get further into that $33.9 million carry forward and it's using up our working cash flow, this balance could get lower. And also, when we changed that reserve policy, we actually created an interest reserve. So the interest is accumulating not in the undesignated, but we actually have a reserve account for interest, so you can see how much that's building up. That budget is on
14.
Sorry, I have a previous version.
You're looking for the reserve sheet?
Yes.
Page 14.
Okay, so on page 14 of the operating budget, you can see there that we've accumulated a fair amount in that operating reserve to date, and so, or in that interest reserve. And so council at some point can provide direction to staff to use that if there was a project we wanted to use it for, or what have you. But like I said, in the past, interest just went into the operating fund. It funded operating. If we had a surplus for the year, it got transferred to the reserve, to the undesignated reserve, and there was really no, specific accountability for that interest earned on reserve funds. So in this case, we actually track it. So, we can estimate probably it's going to actually come in a little bit higher, but on the conservative side, just in case we end up borrowing temporarily from those funds until we get permanent financing in place, I don't like to aim too high. And again, it's not an operating, it's not balancing a budget or anything, it's just building up in that reserve, and then at some point, if we do need funds for a project over budget or a strategic priority of council, those funds are sitting in that interest reserve, and we could recommend that those be used for a project either through council request or a staff proposal or through the budgeting process itself. At this point, there hasn't been anything identified specifically to use that for.
Okay, thank you.
Long answer, short question.
Can you remind me we have the police reserve. We've been setting money aside for a number of years. Can you remind me what the total is that's in the police reserve now?
Police reserve is estimated.
It's on that page 14.
It's estimated to be 1.765 by the end of March 31st, 2024. 200,000 going in, 85,000 coming out, so it'd be at 1.88 million, estimated to be by March 31st, 2025.
And our lease is over in that building in 2032. Okay, thank you.
Give us next slide.
Yeah.
All right. Ta-da. Thank you, Chief. So you do have the detailed capital budget. We presented that budget to you earlier in this calendar year. So this is just a refresher for you. And so you will see by department the capital budget. So as the chief indicated, in the police column, you'll see a couple of years, 2930 and 3031, which have estimates in for building replacement and partially using those reserve funds to fund that. And again, it becomes part of our 10-year capital plan, and you can see the detail on that. So you can also see under administration, it's 18.9 million, which is mostly made up of Exit 12A as well as the water tower projects that kind of fell under the CAO's office. There's 30.4 million under engineering, $1.9 million under fire, 714,000 under the museum, the bulk of which is the carry forward project for their humidification and exterior upgrades to their building. There's $1.5 million related to parks. The police, as mentioned, 11.3 million. Public Works, 890,000. Wastewater, almost 7 million. And transit at 724,000. And the reason that's high is because I believe in 3031, that's the estimated end of useful life of our current transit buses. So that's not additions to the fleet, that would be the replacement after 10 years. So it's kind of give you a kind of a view of what the 10-year capital plan looks like if I just give you totals and by department. Again, we had provided you with some information during that early, or I believe late January meeting on debt service ratios. So currently the 10-year projected debt service ratio is here. I believe in 2032-33 it hits a maximum of 17.95%.
Assuming no additional grants
this
over those years, right?
This is based on some assumptions with respects to grants that we're currently sourcing.
Right.
But other than that, it's not, nothing else is assumed.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So the next item, the next slide, shows you the projected debt servicing costs. So you can see in 24-25 our debt servicing costs are just over $1 million. And by 2033-34, we're over $6 million in principal and interest payments on our debt for both wastewater and town. And that's why the debt service ratio looks like it is, because debt service ratio is basically our debt repayment divided by the revenue that we can generate. And so when I say the debt service ratio is 17.7%, that's 17.7% of our revenue is used to service our debt. And this is, again, a look at the 24-25 capital budget Tammy mentioned earlier, which is $8.356 million. We're proposing to fund it with capital from operating of $2.3 million, which is $1.1 million higher than we normally would. Gas tax funds of $669,000. Grants of $2.8 million, and those could be confirmed or grants that we're currently sourcing. We are expecting to have to borrow $1.4 million. We're using $48,000 from capital reserve and just over $1 million from the operating reserve to fund those capital projects. So we looked at the reserve fund budgets a couple minutes ago, and so just a reminder of the operating reserve policy and the capital reserve policy. So the operating reserve policy says we will target 20% of general operating expenses to be in our operating reserve, and As you know, the province does a calculation of the financial condition indicators, and so they indicate that they consider 20% to be low risk for municipalities. So for 24-25, we're actually at 46.2%, which is a fair amount in those reserves. But as you know, we've got some earmarked for Exit 12A and so on. But to give you an idea of kind of where we are in relation to the province's kind of information they provide as guidance. On the other hand, with capital reserve, the capital reserve policy says we'll try to have at least 10% of operating fund expenses plus amortization in the capital reserve. But for 24-25, we're only 8.6%. The reason I'm not worried about it is because we have a lot more in operating reserve. And there are a number of projects like the business park and such, monies that we could actually put in the capital reserve. But when they're in capital reserve, you can only use them for capital then. So say there was something we needed that was in operating budget, other than debt repayment, you can't use capital reserve money for operating things. So it just tends to have more flexibility in the operating reserve as opposed to in the capital reserve, which is truly you can only use it for capital purposes. So we could, like I said, if our operating was closer to 20%, I'd be more concerned that the capital was only 8.6, but it's pretty reasonable given we have enough in the operating reserve this time. And the province doesn't have a calculation on capital reserve. They have an operating reserve calculation and they have an overall reserve calculation. So they don't have a minimum requirement for capital reserve. All right, so any questions on reserves before I move on?
Councilor Tanner. One, and I'm not sure it's properly formulated in my mind, but how viable going forward, given our debt servicing ratio and our capital expenses, do you feel it will be possible to maintain those reserve policies? Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Okay.
Well, the capital budget, so as you know, we have a 10-year capital plan. And that 10-year capital plan shows you how those will be funded as well. And so that budget right now doesn't show a significant drawdown on those reserves other than police for the police building. And the Exit 12A one, but that has a specific purpose. So we don't specifically have anything in there to use up interest reserve and whatnot. As you know, as future years come and maybe there's a decision between a tax rate and how do we fund this capital, maybe that's when council says we're going to use up some of those reserves, like interest reserve, for example. But in the 10 years, in the 10-year capital budget as it's presented, we don't show a significant depletion of those operating reserves. That'll be a choice of council as we go through each year, but we're not proposing to reduce it significantly. Usually when we use it is when we have an unexpected significant repair or a capital project that has to proceed that came in over budget. Typically, staff haven't recommended using any of the excess funds other than those times.
Other questions? This is our first budget meeting, so I know people might be watching going, they're pretty quiet. Well, it's a lot to absorb, and there are
two more nights.
Two more budget meetings, so we get to do this all again. So, is there a limit to how much we can loan ourselves? Sorry, go ahead.
No, so by loan ourselves. Borrow from our own reserves?
Correct.
Yeah. We can borrow from our own reserves, but then when we need the reserves, the funds won't actually be sitting there.
Well, where'd they go?
Exactly. So right now, we're kind of at the tail end of when we used to borrow from our own capital reserve, but typically we're just fine, and we're charging ourselves interest on top of that. So, we, at this point, the borrowing rate is a little bit higher now, but 2 or 3 years ago, our interest rates were quite low.
Sure.
And they're still fairly low compared to other commercial borrowing for provincial debentures.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
typically we go that route because we're paying probably less on that than we're earning on a bank account.
Yeah. Okay.
off to wastewater rates. So just a couple of things that are probably seem repetitive at this point, but overall, the budget increase for wastewater revenue is 20%. Of that, as a result of that, we are putting $1.3 million in the wastewater reserve. It is directly going there to make sure we have a sufficient emergency fund. And the estimated balance at March 31st, 2025, so the end of the fiscal year we're talking about, is $2.9 million. As you know from recent tenders, we can be $2.9 million over on a tender. Hopefully not, but it has happened. And so primarily it's there as an emergency fund. We've had to use it for projects like the flare stack that unexpectedly happened in the middle of a fiscal year and wasn't in the budget. So that $2.9 million is a small cushion when you compare it to the $79 million we're going to spend on wastewater in the next 10 years. In addition, as I talked about with the town budget, within wastewater, once the capital budgets that are in place now with carry forward and the capital for 24-25, if they are all completed, I estimate our increased principal and interest payments on wastewater-related debt will increase by $958,000. So even though we're putting $1.3 million in that reserve, I know that next year like this is the last year of the ability to put that significant of amount in without increase, if there was no increase in the wastewater rates. But that's because we know that debt and debt principal and interest is imminent as soon as the projects we have in process are financed. So just to give you an idea, the 1.3 million isn't an annual option. This could be the last year of putting the large amount in there. That's why it's important to get that emergency reserve built up. And the goal has always been to make sure that the wastewater rates are actually covering wastewater operating and capital expenditures. Because as you recall, when we've talked about the wastewater rate in the past, it hadn't been covering those. And so new debt related to wastewater projects and operating should be covered by wastewater rates themselves. All right, so as for the actual wastewater rates, what's in this current budget version is that we keep the first unit of residential and commercial at the rates from 23-24. So if it's an individual home or an individual business, their rates will be $518 and $1,109 as they were in 23-24. So we're not proposing any change to that. But as council's aware, when we were talking about budget last year, where there was a real discrepancy was multi-unit buildings. So a multi-unit residential property had a significant discount on its sewer rate for anything over the first unit. And so council increased those second or additional unit rates last year to $328,000. And we're recommending setting those additional unit rates at 90% of the first unit rate. So 90% of the 518 and 90% of the 1,109 for the residential and commercial units. So that's previously we were at 63 and 67% respectively of the base rate. And we're recommending going up to 90%. In addition to that, we're recommending several new categories, being large industrial, education, ancillary car wash, and large grocery, in order to have those base charges more reflect the usage. In addition to that, there is a long-term care facility category being proposed so that they are not negatively impacted by the increase in the additional unit rate, because we're not talking about senior residences, we're talking about long-term care facility, in which there is one in town, and they could potentially be significantly overpaying based on their water consumption information that we have. It doesn't seem appropriate that each additional bed in a long-term care home be paying the same rate as a full residential unit or an apartment. So we are recommending leaving that at the $328 per unit that was in place for 23-24. we are recommending increasing the hospital base rate to $10,000, sorry, and $100 per bed. I was reading ahead, not. And in the previous year, I believe it was $4,900 and $79 per bed. So increasing that hospital to get that closer to actual costs. And the hotel base rate, which would be the $1,109, would remain unchanged, but increasing to $100 per room from $79. So this gives you a bit of a visual of what I just said for rates. So the additional residential sewer was $328 last year. In this budget, we're proposing it go to $466. The additional commercial sewer was $742. We're recommending it go to $998. And then the other ones, the additional new categories that were mentioned in the hospital and so on. So it gives you an idea of the individual rates.
Questions on those, Councillor Conklin?
Large industrial, how many of those do we have? Just the one?
Just one.
Okay, so from that study that we had from
2019.
Jerry and Blaine?
Thank you. 2019, okay, so they recommended at that time, hospital, the rate should be pegged at about $72,000 per year. So, I mean, granted, yeah, we are going from like 5,000 to 10,000, but we are still woefully short of the recommendation.
I can confirm that their water consumption has decreased since the time of that study.
Okay. Well, let's say it decreased by half. They still
So
still
when
getting a
I
good
looked
deal.
at that one, kind of given today, so there's it's good to reference the study, but with a grain of salt. So there's a couple of things in that the capital that was reflected in that budget is nowhere comparable to what we have in our current capital budget. And there's various things that have changed, such as the water consumption at, some of our industrial users even, that have changed significantly. So we do hope, as we work on the wastewater transition plan, that we can update the model with current consumption. So while I have been using it as a guideline, it is kind of no different than Matt's North Parkade study. It's just outdated. It's 5 years old now, and a lot of the assumptions in there probably need some revisions. So we're definitely getting closer, but remembering it's $10,000 plus $100 per bed. So it's not $10,000 rate. It's just the calculation is based on the number of beds. And as the hospital expands, that should also be to our benefit.
Okay, thanks. So, I mean, we have made great strides in increasing the residential and commercial to the appropriate level. The hotel base rate, what is that?
The hotel base rate's just the same as the commercial base rate charge,
it is?
the 1109, but they're paying by number of beds available.
And the education category, what are we looking at there?
That would be NSCC, so post-secondary as well as secondary schools that are within town.
Yeah, sorry, what would be the
increase?
Is there going to be a
They
new
would have been
rate
at
for
the
this category?
1109, and they would be going to 4,000.
4,000.
There is large water consumption at all of those identified in those categories.
Yeah, I see on the next slide, there we are, there are the numbers. Okay, thank you.
Other questions on these?
I think when we went over this before, there was a lot of it that we thought were low, and there was a lot that was thought was too high. So what we're trying to do now is balance it out so it's fair for everybody.
Yeah, and as Kim said, making sure those, so the long-term care home units in particular would have if we kept going down the path they're going, they're going to overpay. So we're trying to, balancing it out is a good way to phrase it for sure. Going to, getting where it's cost recovery.
I believe the end game is to look at a model that's based on water consumption.
Right.
But that, as Kim had indicated before, there's a number of things that need to be fine-tuned before we would jump right into that.
Absolutely.
Councillor Tanner.
I didn't understand your comment about capital then versus capital now. Could you
Right,
explain
so
that?
in 2019,
Yeah.
the wastewater capital budget was significantly less than it currently is, based on the $79 million we have in wastewater capital right now. At the time that report was prepared, the
Right.
capital was not nearly as significant, and they only did 3 years, and they were like those 3 years in 2019 were not significant at all. So the whole model is kind of out of proportion, and
Right.
some of our water customers are consuming less water, and the model proposes using water rates or water consumption values to calculate it. So even that information is certainly outdated.
Right, which kind of gets to my point. If we're,
It's hard to.
but if we're basing everything on water consumption is decreasing on the whole in general. Aren't we just burying ourselves deeper by continuing on this path? Of looking at it.
If water consumption goes down, but we still need to pay for our wastewater, the rate per cubic meter would just have to go up. If they consumed less, the rate per cubic meter would have to go up. So it's
Right.
part of what's in that study for setting the wastewater rate is actually to have a base plus a consumption charge, because you can only handle so much variability in that wastewater utility, so that if it's all based on consumption, it can be too volatile, and then the revenue's not there to support the operations of the wastewater and to repay the debt. So while there is a consumption portion, the base portion is still more than half of the bill in that model that was proposed in 2019. And even in the early years, I think it's only maybe 20 or 30% in those first couple of years of that model that was presented. So even though we talk about getting to a consumption-based, theirs was meter size, created a base charge, and then consumption was the rest of the charge, but consumption by no means was the majority of that charge in their model.
So somewhat to Councillor Conklin's point, or all to Councillor Conklin's point, when in 2019 we were looking at a $72,000 fee for the hospital, and we're only sitting at 10 plus per bed fee, based on consumption.
So what I could do when we meet next Tuesday, I can provide you with kind of the equivalent dollar value with current water consumption, just to give you an idea of
Okay.
If all things were 2019, what would that hospital rate be?
Okay.
I know I've looked at it, and it's considerably less.
Okay.
The same, I think, that we ended up with the large industrial, right? So we thought, ooh, massive amounts of water going in must mean massive amounts of water going out.
Right,
Then we
and it's
realized
not.
it is not.
Yeah.
So it's making sure we're not overcharging based on, you must be discharging this much amount of water, but also at the same time making sure people aren't getting a free pass. So it's finding that balance, right? So, but having that information would be helpful for next week.
Yeah, I think it'll just help understand that one, that situation in particular a little bit better.
Councillor Conklin.
So are we now at a point where either we have to either get to a proper formula to figure out, a more accurate sewer rate for every category here, or should we look at getting another water study done, or sewer rate, or whatever it was with Ben and Jerry, or Blaine and...
Jerry, we should definitely get a study with Ben and Jerry.
Blaine and...
The recommendation is to actually get that updated, because there are some concerns in terms of the length of time that's passed, plus as Kim suggested, there's things that need to be addressed that weren't necessarily addressed in that 2019 study. Like how do you deal with certain scenarios, right? We have pipes that are not sized right for residential, for example, and stuff like that.
Yeah, the meter sizes, there's a number of properties that create a issue where the water meter user is not the same as the land owner, that cause us some issues. So if you recall, staff had discussed with council kind of the 5 to 7 year plan for wastewater that does require some additional studies and work by Jerry and Blaine, but I think the pre-work to that was some of the other studies we have going on right now or planned in the near future, wastewater treatment plant assessment and so on. Some of those need to be done before Jerry and Blaine start looking at this model again. Yeah, I have one mapped out roughly for myself, but I just haven't had time to invest in it deeply, but I would use that in concert with them as they prepare their model, so I can make sure I understand all their inputs, because I think they just went off and prepared that model last time. I wasn't here then, so I didn't have any input into the model at that time.
Okay. Thank you. Other questions on wastewater rates? I guess we're at the end of that presentation.
Yeah, so I mean, the only other thing is the capital budget. You did have a look at that. It's wastewater with a few injects for 24-25. And as the mayor indicated, we do have two more, understanding that it's been a couple hours of budget. We do have two more nights scheduled, April 2nd, next Monday night, and if required, April 8th for an additional night if council wishes to take that extra time. From tonight, we got, I think, a little bit on the wastewater rate that Kim will bring back some number for the hospital in terms of actual consumption. But if there's anything else that, based on the presentation tonight, you feel you want additional information on, then certainly let us know, and we can make sure that we bring that back to you for a meeting on the 2nd.
Councilor Thorburn.
Tammy, we have meters on Michelin and then the hospitals, so we should know how much water's going in.
We do have their water going in. The challenge is the water going out.
Yeah, I know, but we're not down there yet.
No, but I think that there would be probably, with, say, some of the larger industrial users, for example, that may use water as part of their process, and they would probably challenge that rate because it wouldn't be based on, if we're going to a metered rate, right, like with the base charge and then the meter, it wouldn't actually be an actual reflection of water out, because it's based on water in equals water out, and in that case it wouldn't. So when we get to that point, that's where we'll look at what other provisions can be incorporated into that to give those types of users the ability to meter the water going out, which I know some do.
My question was phrased the other way. So we keep hearing that Michelin's losing less water. So is there a form somewhere that shows us what they paid in 2019, 2020, so to verify that they are using less?
We would have their meter information.
Yeah. That would give us some information on, because I don't know when you're ever going to get it metered, because we talked about this in 2016, and here we are in 2024, and we still don't have a method of properly metering water going out.
We have metered information, like the historical meter information on our
water consumption, but we making incorrect assumptions about water going out could result in just as many discrepancies as we currently have with a base charge. You're just transferring inequity from one to another, and we aren't necessarily getting to where council wants us to get by using a consumption-based model without making sure that we have a complete understanding and whether we need even just some additional meters in some areas that where we have differences between landowners and water meter users and things like that. There's a number of issues to be resolved, and that's why we indicated that as part of the longer wastewater rate structure and planning, that we'll look at it, we'll get there, but it's just not a snap your fingers and go.
We can't forget, though, that people bring water in. We can't forget that people bring water in and then sometimes let it out.
You mean like a pool?
No, like a person. Right? Not all water flowing in from a pipe.
You mean like bottled
It's an
water?
estimate.
It's an estimate.
No.
It's
not
an estimate.
water. I'm
going to your house
you're
and
carrying
around.
around.
Yeah. It's an estimate.
Just the same as when you wash a car, that water is
Yeah.
not going back. May hit the sewer system. If it hits a
Yeah.
drain down the street, it may evaporate into the air. There's only a certain level of accuracy that we're going to get to.
Can you provide more detail on,
I can go into great depth.
I didn't really understand where you're going with this. And
I think you got it.
If that's the level of accuracy we're aiming for, we might have.
Tell me your meeting
We
has
have to put
run
meters
long
on
without telling me
ourselves.
your meeting has run long. Okay.
Follow up on Andrew's comment. Is there a possibility that we could start and not go full gamut and just look at metered residential use, which should be fairly simple? Forget about the mission, forget about the hospital, just start with a residential and then build your way up.
Our residential actually has a number of issues. There's hundreds of units of residential that are a problem.
Uh-oh.
Yeah.
So we have a little bit of work to do before we get there, but
Okay.
we do have to get,
But we certainly know how much water they're using, how much is coming in to the meter system.
We have the metered number, yes.
so we know the end, we just don't know the out.
Well, we may know the end, but I don't know the end because I don't see the numbers.
We can,
We're talking
we can,
about consumption's
It's-
less.
It wasn't
I
the
wanna see
meter
it.
piece that
The
was
other
the
part is
challenge,
the water
The
meter
base.
readings belong to a different legal entity, not the town.
yeah, so we can get that information though.
Yeah.
Are there any other questions on this? Not on that, no, but just on in general.
Making a point.
Do you have a number 2 question? Sorry, do you have a second question?
Good one.
Sorry, yeah, now you know.
It's not based on law.
Now you know you've run too long. Okay, so we have 2 more budget meetings next Tuesday. So Monday is, there's no council on Monday.
Tuesday.
So council will be on Tuesday. There's a special council meeting. I would encourage you, if you have questions regarding any of the presentations tonight, or especially on the capital, as Kim said, we've reviewed the capital already as a council, but if you have questions that have come up from the documents that you have, please reach out to staff through the CAO. Again, I would encourage you to CC all of us so that we're not asking the same question 7 times. And then we'll be prepared to go through this again on Tuesday. And I would also encourage the public that are watching to also reach out to anyone on council to ask questions regarding the budget, starting from that there was no planned tax rate increase, but I'm sure there are lots of questions about what's in the budget, so reach out to us. Did you have anything else to add?
No, just that what we'll do is we'll compile the questions as well so that we can bring them back to the meeting next week.
Okay. Kim, you're good? You're done? Okay.
I'm done.
All right, without further ado, can I have a motion to adjourn? Deputy Mayor Frazier, seconded by Councillor Conklin. We are adjourned. Thank you.